Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. And we'll start with our flag salute and roll call.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Roll call.
Martinez.
Here.
Feliz.
Here.
Howard. Colonna.
Here.
Minthorn. Here. Russell. Sorry. Grotting.
Here.
Kiefauer.
Here.
Pham.
Here.
Hernandez. Olson. Sordo.
Okay, great. And we'll start with board member reports. I would like to, I'm gonna let Dawn and Lynette go first, and Vlad's not here, but we're gonna celebrate him, but they get the honor of going first.
Oh, boy.
As we also want to take a few minutes and celebrate them and thank them for their extraordinary service to the board as advisors. We have something for you, which is a very small token of appreciation for your contributions. Dawn, your work, this position has always been essential for the board. We have used the wisdom of superintendents to guide our thinking along the way. And your voice in particular has been incredibly valuable to the work of this board over the last few years. Your work out there is very meaningful, but your work in this room really is making a difference for kids. You speak from your heart. You always give us a straight shot about what's going on in the field, on the ground. You press our thinking, and you have very big shoes to fill by our next superintendent advisor. But I just want to really appreciate you, your courage, your honesty, your candor, and your wisdom about what's going on the ground has been incredibly appreciated by me personally, and I know by the board. So thank you for your service. We know you're not really going away, but we won't have your wisdom in the room with us for our regular board meetings every month. But I'm sure we'll get a chance to continue to work together in lots of ways in your leadership in the state. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
So why don't we let you start, and then I'll say something about Lynette, and then we'll.
Great. It's just been a privilege serving on this board, and it's a couple things I'd like to say. It's really given me a better appreciation of the support staff here at the Department of Education, number one, and what they do. They're incredibly intelligent, hardworking people. I think having Colt come into his position has really been an uplift to the department. He's out, he's everywhere. Charles, I just want to thank you for your leadership, and you're kind of everywhere too, and organizing and being able to lead such difficult conversations. Anthony, you're always there. I come with your equity issue. Modesta, you're very quiet, but when you say something, it's so incredibly intelligent what you have to offer here and what you bring. And Erica, you represent the people really doing the hard work in the schools, making a difference for kids. So, and of course, what we're here for, students, this is what we should be here. And finally, to both, you talked a little bit about having a superintendent's voice. I think this board is so incredibly lucky to have both Jerry and George on here. They've done the work. Not only have they done the work, when you look at the work that they've done in districts, they've done some incredible work. So it's just not having some superintendents here. It's having some superintendents who've made an incredible difference for lives. So my point is we have a very diverse group here with multiple perspectives, and it's just an amazing group, and once again, amazing ODE staff that come here, and it's just made me realize how difficult a job, Colt, you have. Charles, you're trying to herd. We talk about herding cats. You have board members, and we all come from different perspectives. Colt's trying to herd 197 districts in the right way, and we all have unique challenges. So just really appreciate the opportunity and appreciate everything that all of you folks do every day. It's been a privilege.
Thank you so much, Don. I'll let the other board members in their reports, I know they're going to want to say a few kind things about you as well.
We do have an end time.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll let Lynette go next. Lynette, you have been a great contributor. What the rest of the board doesn't, I'm not sure, realize is that George and I get to hang out with Lynette more because we get to travel back and forth with her. And so I've gotten to know her well in those car rides, and I have learned a lot about students' perspectives from Lynette, and we have in the meeting time and again where you slow us down to ask questions and give voice to student concerns. And you know, I can think of a few times when on our drive to the board meeting where Lynette asked a question, raised an issue that was incredibly relevant, and I really appreciated your willingness to have the courage to raise those issues, to bring them up to the board, to slow us down, to represent the voice of students so elegantly in your work on the board. We're going to miss you, but we are so excited about what's next for you. I was sad to learn that she's not going to a Claremont College as a Pitzer alum. I was sad to hear that. But she was going to what was my second choice school, UC Berkeley. So we're real excited to watch your progress as you engage in your career and your higher education. So thank you for all of your work on the board.
Thank you so much for having me on the board. It's been such a privilege and honor to be part of such a diverse board. It's really inspiring, especially under the current political climate. And I've been so welcomed, and I feel incredibly humbled to be part of this. And it's really nice, just given my background, and to be able to be part of something like this. And I'm so thankful for the year that you guys have given me. It's been really nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Vlad is not here, unfortunately, our other student advisor. I suppose this is sort of overtime duty since the school year ended. But we extend our profound appreciation to his voice. He's brought a very unique and valued perspective, given his community experience and work and knowledge in Woodburn, raising hard questions like Lynette, asking us to slow down where we needed to. So even though he's not here, I want to give him sort of cosmic love and appreciation, and we'll make sure he gets his certificate. So thanks to Vlad. Okay, let's see. How about Erica, who will continue? We're not saying goodbye to Erica. She's going to continue, thank goodness, in her role as educator advisor to the board.
I just talked to OEA this last week, and they asked, are you willing to serve again? And I said gladly. It's a really important role that this board plays, and it's been extremely interesting for me to see what the work that all of you do and to be a part of that. So thank you to both of you for serving on this committee, because I know it's time and energy, but it's time and energy well spent. I think we would agree. So thank you for that. Other than that, we've been wrapping up the school year, and it seemed like a long year this last spring. So we're gearing up for next year, and OEA is excited about some of the things that the state board is doing. So really in hopes of being part of those important conversations. Thanks.
Modesta?
Yeah, so I think that sitting next to Dawn all this time, it's been really kind of enlightening. The experience that you brought to the state board and your perspectives from that experience is something that I've always listened to, and it was always interesting for me to kind of sit here and listen to you bring up some very interesting issues and concerns, things that I hope that we're able to continue, and I always appreciated your perspective on things. And We talked a few times. And I really, I wish you the best and hope you continue with your education and someday be back here as a state board rep. So, and other than that, just, we had our government-to-government meeting and we had quite a bit of things to talk about, but I don't think anything that's too pressing right now, so that's all.
Great, thanks, Modesta. Jerry, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Lynette, I'd like to congratulate you on your choice of university. I think it's one of the best in the world.
I'm looking at Charles.
Hey there, Charles.
And I think that you will have a world-class education, which will propel you to tremendous options. So good luck to you. You'll be missed, but I think a part of us goes with you, and there's some interesting lessons to learn here that individuals your age don't have the opportunity for. And I'd really enjoy maybe every 6 months or so if you could just drop us a little line and a short paragraph email and let us know how you're doing. It would be fun. So congratulations to you. And Don, I know you put your heart and soul into your work, and so I very much appreciate your willingness to add this on top of it all. Having been in your position prior to you, the feeling of the hard work and the gains and losses that we made, it was really reassuring to see you come into that role and know that you would improve what's there and take on the challenges. And I think it's one of the hardest jobs in the state. Really, really tough work, but extremely rewarding. So thank you for all you do and adding this onto your list. And I have appreciated what you've had to say on a whole number of items. Felt allied in terms of the thoughts from the field that are crucial, I think, to our relationships and how this board is seen and reacted to. So thank you for all your good work, and hope you have a great summer and a good new school year. Thanks.
Great. Is Kimberly on the line?
Yes.
Okay, great. Kimberly, did you want to give a board report?
Nothing to report, just a lot of gratitude to our students for being part of our advising team on the state board. Congratulations on graduating. Congratulations on your choices of schools. It's been a pleasure serving with you. Dawn, wow. I didn't realize this was going to be your last meeting, and I'm sorry that I'm not there to give you a big hug. It has been a pleasure learning from you and being part of this team with your knowledge and expertise and wisdom and experience. So thank you so much for that. And also just being a good guy. And the boys will miss seeing you at our retreat. And I also wanted to say just to all graduates in the state of Oregon this year, congratulations. It was a tough year for high school students, and seniors in particular. I'm sure there was a lot going on in the world, as well as having to do the work of completing your education. So congratulations for accomplishing that and and moving on to the next step in your future. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly. Anthony.
Okay. So, yeah, I want to echo the same thing. First of all, I want to ask you, what do you major? Do you have a major yet, or?
No.
Not yet? All right, that's okay.
I know what I'm interested in, and I think I'm
Okay.
going to spend part of my first year exploring those interests first.
Yeah.
But something in math and science, and most likely engineering, but I'm still.
Still open? Yeah.
Yeah.
I never figured out what I want to do yet either, so don't.
Oh.
Either physical therapy, attorney, blah blah blah, and nothing worked. So, but no, congratulations, thank you, your voice, and Vladimir, who's not here. I mean, you're the heart and soul of why we're here, and it was really great to have you here, and definitely listen, and I know that you influenced me, one, just by your presence, because it always reminded me about students, right? And then also to just your thought in all of in what we were working on. So thank you so much for doing that. Best of luck. And what I think the only advice I could have for you is just have a ton of fun, because it's the journey, right? I mean, you're gonna get your education. I know you will, but have fun, you know, along the way, because it's that journey, I think, that what makes education so incredible. So congratulations with that. And then Don, you know, until we, you know, it's for us, you know, I guess we are involved in a lot of things. And that's what I want to say about Don. If you don't know Don, I mean, a lot of people just do the work that they're assigned to do, paid for their job. But I see Don in a lot of different places and a lot of different committees. And you know, that's extraordinary. It takes that extraordinary type of person or character to not only do what you're supposed to do, which is a huge responsibility, but then in trying to make the world a better place in a lot of other things. And I see you in an educational setting, but I'm sure you probably do that in other realms that I don't even know about. So we're super blessed to have you here, your presence. It's been felt. You're making your impact, I know, beyond here, with real people, with real students, teachers, your staff. So I think that's what's more important. You're making a difference in people when it's all said and done. And again, I'd just like till we meet again, because I know we'll run into each other with some other committees that we're involved in. So I just wanted to say that, and you will surely be missed. I respect everything that you say. And what I liked about Don is that, like, I don't know if you necessarily agreed or disagreed with everything there, but I feel like the way you presented your information, and then it was, okay, the board will decide, right? And I didn't ever feel pressured one way or the other. It was just that you were giving us your professional opinion, and I appreciate that. And I think that's what the advisor really helps, and not to feel like, okay, this is what you want you to, it was just very objective. So I appreciate that, and I think that's a very unique quality, right? So thank you. Thank you. And as far as my report, I've been going to a lot of graduations, high school, college, a lot of celebrations. So I think, again, congratulations for all the students, not only high school, but obviously those high school students became college students, and then they graduated, right? So I think it's a journey, right? And I'm hoping that the students that graduated with undergrads go off and get their master's degree and continue what they're doing. Or, again, all those career technical education that we talk a lot about, sometimes we don't think about, but that's a milestone too, those students that are getting, careers in that field too. So congratulations for them and their families and the communities, because having gone through it myself, and probably all of us here, it's not just, you don't just do it by yourself, right? There's a lot of different people, instructors, professors, family, friends that help you along the way to kind of keep pushing you to keep going. So thank you. That's it.
Great. George.
Thank you. I don't know that I can add much to what's already been said about Lynette and Don. I hope Vlad is listening, because I really appreciated having him on board. Obviously, I didn't get a chance to know him as well as I have Lynette, because I've had the honor and privilege of driving back and forth to meetings with her, and had the opportunity to really get a sense of what it's like to be a student, and have always appreciated her insights on both agenda items and in general about the education system and what's working and what may not be. So I wish you all the best, and I know that you'll be very successful in whatever you choose, and I'm not sorry you chose Berkeley.
We're picking
an excellent choice. So congratulations, and we talk a lot about student voice, and the opportunity that I've had, and that Charles and I've had, particularly in the rides up and back, to listen to you and to hear some of the things that you think we need to be thinking about and that are important to you, has been really, really a privilege for us. And so thank you very much for doing this and being so faithful and being a part of this. So thank you, and all the best luck. And in terms of Don, I don't know that I have much to add. We've worked together off and on for many years. I actually am going to be very sad to see you go because I've enjoyed hearing your voice and being able to also sound you out on some of these issues in between breaks and so forth and say, Don, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? Having been in that role, I understand the complexities, and I know a lot of people sit and listen to us deliberate and think, well, that's a really simple response. Why don't you just do that? And it never really is that simple when you got how many ever schools you got to worry about, the teachers and staff, the parents and the community, which are all coming from oftentimes very different perspectives in terms of what they think ought to be done and should be done. And you've done an excellent job as a superintendent of doing that and bringing that reality to us as a board. So all the best to you. I know we'll be seeing you. I want to just say to some other folks who are listening and to the board that one of the things that I've appreciated, and I think you all know this from some of the things he's talked, is that Don has always been very visible as an early learning champion and early childhood education. And in his previous district, really provided strong leadership in getting early childhood programs running up and so forth. And the Early Works program that he did in partnership with Children's Institute was just a model around the state. So I appreciate that. And then lastly, I just want to say that this is also Charles's last meeting as chair, and can't express how much appreciation for the excellent, outstanding job that you've done, and knowing that you'll still be around, hopefully, and the knowledge and the insights that you can bring to this board and have brought to this board will still be available to us. So I want to thank you for all the leadership and all this commitment that you've made. And somebody mentioned earlier the kind of schedule that you keep and the things that you are balancing across the state and actually across the country. And so appreciate and thank you so much for the outstanding leadership that you've provided to this board the last 2 years at least that I've been involved. So thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Kim, welcome.
Hi.
Did you want to give a report?
I don't have a report, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, George, for that. I appreciate that, and we'll get to vote later today on sort of the official handing over of the gavel, and our new leadership will start in July. And as George indicated, I will still be around. So I did want to just echo what Kimberly said, just an appreciation for all the students and professional educators who are now looking forward to a summer after what has been an incredibly intense and challenging year in many ways in Oregon. There are lots of big issues on the table in this state and lots of big issues on the table in this country. I think we're in really good hands. So I have a lot of confidence in the direction Oregon's going, but I know that it's been a difficult year. I really want to congratulate all of our students who walked and graduated, some of them flying through, some of them having to cope with lots of different challenges to make it to those stages, and with their parents and support networks behind them. These are extraordinary achievements, and I had the personal privilege of attending 3 different graduations for my own son because of the way his programs have worked. So I had a nice taste of different kinds of graduations, but just such deep appreciation for the work that our educators do all over the state to ensure that students make it across that stage. So I want to congratulate them, but also our leaders and our teachers who are doing the work to help prepare our students to graduate and then go on to their next big step in their careers in education. So I want to echo that. I also wanted to extend some appreciation to the invitation that COSA gave for me to come and talk about equity around the issues of education and health, social determinants of education and health outcomes. I had a great conversation around social emotional development, and with a sharp focus on equity with that group yesterday. I'm very impressed at the level of engagement, and I think superintendent leadership to generate that work, which is focused on early learning, social emotional development, and workforce development. There's an opportunity in that work to really unite the state on what would be potentially very big policy initiatives and directions. And I just want to acknowledge Don Colt, I know, has been engaged, Craig at COSA and others that have helped lead that charge. It was a hot room, partly because it was actually physically hot, but also because the energy was so strong, and the openness to thinking in a really more complex way around how equity interacts with the social emotional well-being of kids was very ripe. So I was thrilled to go up there and get a chance to present with that group earlier this week. Okay, so let's go on to our I'm going to call Colt director also, as I do want to acknowledge some of the hard work that Colt has been doing along with the governor's office around the structure of ODE. And I think there was an announcement recently that went out to staff around some of the staffing changes. I want to personally, first of all, congratulate Colt for his leadership. I think you all know that Colt has a sort of a more nuanced title in addition to his regular title as Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction for Oregon. He also has the title of Director of ODE, which is an important, maybe seems like a small shift, but is an important shift in terms of the leadership that he provides for the agency. So I think that's important. And I also want to acknowledge the progress in terms of Colt organizing his team around leadership in ODE, and particularly for Cindy Hunt in her now regularized role, and also to Carmen Urbina in her soon-to-be occupied new role with ODE. So I want to acknowledge those really important moves for ODE and Colt's leadership in helping to really begin to steer the department in really important directions I know that are very well aligned with where the board is going. So, Colt.
Thank you. So I probably have too much to share. I'll try to go quickly, but it seemed like this last, I have time? Okay,
Yeah.
this last month of school, a lot happened. So first, welcome back to Jessica. She's here for one meeting, so you get to enjoy her for this meeting.
We'll take
Zoe's on vacation. She will be back with us for the retreat and helping, working with Anthony and other board members to plan that retreat as well. So she's looking forward to that. And I also want to offer my thanks to both Don and Lynette. And Don I've known for a long, long time, saw him kind of as an example superintendent for years in NISA, actually, and then his work in David Douglas around early learning and around closing achievement gaps, which I think my first introduction to Don was at COSA pullout session where he was talking about their work in NISA and ability and working to close achievement gaps, and we connected there for the first time. But he's been kind of a mentor and strong colleague for many years, and somebody who, when I came onto this board, I felt great having Don here. Somebody who, when I call, he picks up the phone or calls right back, and that's been really helpful, so I really appreciate it. And Lynette, I think you've done an amazing job of sticking with us. I know that that's challenging in your senior year when you have so many other things you're working towards. You're selecting your school and finishing what I know for you is a pretty heavy course load. I was at your graduation, so I saw all the honors that you graduated with. It's very impressive, so I know how hard you work. One of the things that I would say just going into the future is something that I've seen from students who serve on either their local school board or here at the state board level is that oftentimes it's not very many years later when they finish school, they're back in their communities and they've learned, like I think you have heard here from these board members, that your voice made a difference. So you broadened perspective here. I think that for some members you changed their votes on certain things when you brought up questions, and so you have an impact. And what I've seen from students who have experienced that as a high school student, that they know that they can have that same impact when they re-enter a community and we have some that sit on city councils and on school boards. So you know how it works now, and you know that your voice matters, and you can make a difference for all the other students that follow you. So I hope you consider that sometime in the future with all your spare time. And then I won't likely be here. I have to step out from 1 to 2 for a budget meeting at the governor's office, and that is the time when you're voting on your new chair. So I may not be here to also thank Charles for his work. But I've been with the board now for about 8 months, and I really very much appreciated having Charles here to contact on a weekly, sometimes multiple times a week basis on key issues as we talked through things, and I sought his advice about how to work with the board through certain issues, and then advice just really around the direction and vision setting for the state of Oregon in education. And I'm hopeful that that continues. I think that it will, even though you're not in the chair role, and I look forward to having that kind of connection with Anthony as well. But it was, he made for me for a very smooth transition coming in, and I really appreciate it. So thank you. That does lead to some of these other key leadership changes that I just want to make sure that the full board is aware of. I think that you received some of the emails, but I want to reiterate some of what Charles shared. So we do have Cindy now, who's been in the acting role of Chief of Staff for a while, but she is going to now serve as our permanent Chief of Staff, and I thank her very much for taking on that challenge. It's a key role, and she's been doing really good work in it so far, and I know she'll continue to be a strong leader and a strong advisor to me. And then I'm also super excited to have Carmen Urbina join us as our Deputy Director. This is going to add some new kind of expanded capacity to ODE. It'll be a highly visible position, one that'll help me work and connect to a lot of our external stakeholders and partners, and really try to think about, with those folks, how can ODE do its best possible work to implement policy and efforts to improve student outcomes across our 197 districts. How can we support them in that effort? And I think Carmen has a voice that is respected across the state in community work and in education. And she's the kind of person that can help bring together diverse perspectives and forge a path forward. So I'm very excited about Carmen joining the agency. Also pleased to announce that, and this one just we released last week, we have a new assistant superintendent for the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. We hired Jennifer Patterson from Portland Public School District, who served as a senior director there and has done an outstanding job. She'll partner with our team at OTLA, that's our Teaching, Learning, and Assessment Office, to lead the work of ESSA, to lead the high school success work, that's Measure 98, chronic absenteeism work, and all the other many programs that are run out of that office. They include assessment, federal programs, CTE work, STEM work, standards, Division 22. So much work is done out of the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment that directly impacts schools and students, that it's a very critical position. And I think Jennifer brings a great experience to it from her director position at ODE. She's also taught in our classrooms here in Oregon, and she's been a principal at Boones Ferry Elementary in Westland, Wilsonville. She got her start as a migrant Head Start teacher in Gresham, where she used some of her Spanish-speaking skills in the service of the migrant community. So I think we're just really fortunate to have her. She's very stakeholder-focused, partnership-focused, and I think that she'll do wonderful work for us. She starts July 16th. Carmen starts week after next. So we are bringing together a team of leaders that I think will be fabulous, both internally for our staff and externally for all of our partners and school districts. At the same time, we're also saying goodbye to a few people. So one just walked in the room. She doesn't know I'm talking about her. But Sarah Tyser served as our interim assessment superintendent. And Sarah, I really appreciate what she's done for us. So Sarah, many of you may not know this, but she doesn't even live in Oregon. She's been retired for a few years. She lives in Arizona. She's a longtime Oregon educator, as a teacher, principal who's won awards for closing the achievement gap, a district level director, did tremendous work in Oregon schools. And when we needed somebody to come in and support our team, she stepped up, and I just really appreciate the work that she's done here. She's filled this critical position and provided really sound guidance to our directors and to our staff, and I appreciate it. So thank you, Sarah. And Sarah is going to remain with us through the conference we put on together with COSA in August. She'll be working remotely part of that time as she's going back home with her husband and dog to Arizona, but she'll be here for the conference, and she'll be doing some remote work in between, helping to transition Jennifer into the role. In July, we also are saying goodbye to Sarah Drinkwater, who's our Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. Sarah oversees many, many things also. This is the other really big office that touches every school district in Oregon. So they oversee special education services, the Oregon School for the Deaf, early intervention and early childhood special education, education services for students who are in the justice system or in hospitals or long-term treatment centers, nutrition services, transportation services, and more. So this is, again, a really big role. Sarah's leaving ODE to move to California with her husband so that they can be close to their son, which is really nice. He's settled down in the Bay Area, and she's got a position down there so they can all be together again. And so we wish her well in that. Many of us in the agency, and I think across Oregon, will really miss Sarah's work as well. She's been an instrumental leader in our state. She's always put, in my experience, really over the last couple of years, put Oregon's students' needs first in all the decision-making that she's done here. She's been a source of steadiness for the department through many transitions, and she also just has a lot of grace in the way that she provides leadership to the agency. Her leadership has served as a model for many, including myself. She's able to build bridges and include partners and speak with expertise all at the same time. So really appreciate the work of both of our Sarahs, and wish them well. Just a couple of other items. One is, most of you know that the Advisory Committee on Safe and Welcoming Schools for All Students did complete its work, so they have begun to forward a set of recommendations to me. We didn't have time in our agenda today. We worked with the leadership team to think about what we have time for, but we really didn't want to short shrift this work either, so we're going to bring that to our retreat and go over their recommendations. It very much aligns with some of the other things that you wanted to have happen in our retreat around school safety and around the counselor discussion we wanted to have. So we'll bring that to the retreat and do some deeper work with those recommendations. And I'll be able to get them out to you prior to that as well, so you can look at them prior to the retreat and go in knowing what they are. A little bit on the calendar. So back during the May legislative days, it's been that long since we met, ODE did provide information to legislators on school nutrition, assessment, safe and welcoming schools, and testified to various committees. Jessica, Zoe, and I have continued to participate in the Joint Committee on Student Success tour around Oregon. Since we last met, we visited schools in Woodburn and Southern Oregon, including JDEP and YSEP programs. I also participated in meetings with legislators from our Japanese sister state this month. That's Toyama, the Minister of Education from Poland, and the Mexican consulate. And each of these meetings really focused on approaches to supporting student success in education. And surprisingly, all three of these also had a focus on chronic absenteeism, which was really interesting, because we've been doing some work that's been kind of out front on that with some of our districts, and many of these folks with specific populations in their communities are working on the same issue. So we really took a look at it from a community-based approach, which was great conversations. This month we had our quarterly government-to-government education cluster meeting, like Modesta talked about, with the 9 tribes. And we met at the Coquille Plank House. Our talks focused quite a bit on the Safe and Welcoming Schools effort, but also quite a bit on Senate Bill 13 and the Native curriculum development and how best to proceed with that work and ensuring that the tribal voice is the primary driver for that work. And so we're continuing that effort as well. And then many of you went to graduations. June, I had the opportunity to participate in 8 graduation ceremonies. Some of them were preschool, and then all the way up to community college, including comprehensive high schools like Willamette's, and then alternative high schools, 2 youth correction education program high schools, and all were incredibly inspiring, mostly when the students spoke. And I think that that may be a policy we should consider sometime at graduations. It's students who should speak and not the rest of us. But very impressive group of students in Oregon. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Colt. Jessica, before you get up, I know you're going to go look for public comment, right? I want to, there's a potential agenda, or there's an agenda shift that was just posted, but I want to make sure that the board's and the public's aware of that. So you want to just walk us through the...
Yeah, so we're talking about agenda item 4C, which is the modifications to OAR 581-021-0038. These are new provisions to House Bill 4150, which passed this short legislative session. We were originally going to ask the board to bring this as a first reading, but the bill says that these rules need to be adopted by July 1, 2018. So we're asking for a motion, if the chair entertains that, to move it to an action item as a temporary rule, so we can at least have some model rules that we can send over to OSBA so they can start drafting their model policies that will then trickle down to school districts. This will come back like every other temporary rule that the board takes action probably in September for a first reading, and then a final action in October. This also gives us a little bit more time to actually work and massage those model templates over the summer.
Great. Thank you. So given that introduction, I'm looking for a motion to have item 4C become action on a temporary rule.
So moved.
Moved by George, and a second?
Second.
Second by Anthony. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so why don't we keep it where it is, just to not be confusing.
Yeah.
When we get to it, it'll be an item for action rather than a first read. And again, that will be a temporary rule if we so adopt it, and we will see the final rule potentially in September, but we will have a chance to vote again on a permanent rule. Yes.
While we're on that, if, is it necessary to move something off the consent agenda if you want to comment on it or ask a question about it?
Yes, well, you can
Not-
you also have discussion.
Yeah, you
so-
can have discussion if you're looking for a. It depends on the discussion. So why don't we wait till we get to the consent agenda, and we'll sort of get a sense of your question or point. We may or may not need to move it off the consent agenda. Okay, let's move on to our public comment period.
Let me just set up the clock really quick. So board members, we just want to make a really quick introduction. Corey is now joining the Department of Education. He is Colt's executive assistant, but will also be helping Zoe moving forward with state board related meetings or anything. So he's also going to be helping with public comments and actually keeping clock for us, which is going to be really helpful. So, okay, Joyce Berningheim.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Joyce Bernheim. I'm appearing today on behalf of myself individually, Carol Markovics, PhD, Darren Sikora, PhD, and the Autism Society of Oregon. Also, I can't help but say congratulations on Berkeley as another Berkeley alum. First of all, I want to thank the board and ODE for all of the hard work everyone's done over the last year to bring forward the autism eligibility rules that you will be voting on this afternoon. I think they are a tremendous improvement. This will make Oregon the 6th state in the country to use the current scientific definition of autism and its special education eligibility rules, and the 15th to use some, either the old or the current version of these scientific criteria. So we're once again going to be in the forefront of this issue. There's still some work to be done in the future. I know that you will get some of that also in this afternoon's presentation. There's an ambiguity in the current rules that we didn't have time to address that I think will be important for selecting the right interventions for students, namely assessing their current level of social emotional functioning, as opposed to just a fact that they're way off base, they're way off chronological age. It's very important to understand the details of that in order to select the correct interventions. Also, the Autism Commission, their recommendations on identification rest on a three-legged stool. These rules address two legs of that stool. One is the criteria, and the other is the evaluation process. But we also have work to do on the actual competencies of the individuals on identification teams. The Commission has made recommendations. 14 states have rules that reflect similar concerns to ours. I think that's something else that we're going to have to focus on. I've been conducting research on what the training programs in Oregon for school psychology and speech-language pathology provide, and also the licensure. And it's pretty clear to me, although I haven't completed that research, that we can't count on licensure alone. And so it'll be an important feature as we move forward working together to identify what do we expect people to know. But also I'd like to put this work in a broader context of mental health services and mental health in schools in Oregon. Since I last appeared before you, we've had the 4th in the line of really terrible school shootings by individuals with autism. We've also had the results of a survey conducted of Oregon high school students who identify as their top policy priority the need for greater mental health services in schools. We have a new and much higher standard for progress under IDEA for special education students that was announced last year by the United States Supreme Court in a case involving a student with autism from Colorado. And all of these factors suggest that we need to go much further in raising the level of neuroscience and psychology literacy among school staff, and also increased collaboration among schools, mental health services, and social service agencies, so that we can ensure that all students learn to their maximum potential, remain safe, and prosper in life, and that's what we're all about together. Thank you.
Nancy Lawson.
Good morning, Chairman Martinez and board members. Thank you for allowing testimony again on this subject matter. I write to you as chairman of the Oregon Commission on Autism Spectrum Disorders and also part of the evaluation team for assessing and evaluating students who may be on the autism spectrum. The commission Good. Commission, on behalf of parents and other stakeholders, supports the proposed amendments to OAR 581015, 2130, and 581015, 2000 to align the definition and criteria for autism spectrum disorder as set forth in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual on Mental Disorders, DSM. Further, I'm in support of ODE's proposed new definition of developmental history to include factors important to the accurate identification of emotional and developmental disabilities. Of note, subsection 3A and B, requiring evidence of educational impact and specially designed instruction, is supported as it stands in the current rule. So that two-legged approach, we're looking at autism criteria that'll align more closely with the medical, but also we keep intact the extra piece of, okay, we may have characteristics of autism, but what is the impact to the student in the educational environment? So keeping that as it stands. There are no recommendations to changes in that section. I believe the proposed changes, as reviewed by parents, educational representatives, and community stakeholders throughout Oregon, will help schools better identify students with autism. The adoption of the DSM-5 general criteria will provide better alignment with medical and educational teams, thereby reducing the frequency of parents having to navigate separate educational, medical, and agency evaluations simply to provide the needed supports for their child. The proposed definition and criteria will provide more accurate identification, thereby providing an accurate roadmap, which will lead to the appropriate interventions and supports. Ultimately, we are providing the appropriate educational opportunities for children, which will lead to better outcomes. According to the information gathered on behalf of the Commission, the passage of the proposed OARs will place Oregon as the 14th state to adopt autism criteria that aligns with the DSM language. Oregon is ready to move forward with the current research and practices to accurately identify those experiencing autism. Thank you very much. Brad, you made it in. Yay! Yep.
Good morning, Dr. Martinez, members of the board. My name is Brad Hendershot. I am a program administrator with Columbia Regional Program, and I supervise our autism services there, among other duties. I'm also a speech-language pathologist and licensed autism specialist by background, and I serve on the state's Autism Commission and the Behavior Analysis Regulatory Board. I just have a very brief statement. Today, the Oregon Department of Education is requesting approval of revisions to the rules regarding the evaluation components and criteria for determining eligibility for special education services under the category of autism spectrum disorder. I support these changes without reservation and respectfully encourage the board to vote yes. The revisions modernize our eligibility criteria and assist teams by providing greater clarity and specificity regarding the core behavioral features of autism and the combinations in which they occur across a range of severities. The changes also bring educational and medical definitions of autism into closer alignment, reducing confusion for parents and caregivers, and increase the ability for reciprocal use of evaluation information. The revisions were very thoughtfully crafted by a wide range of stakeholders. I'd like to thank ODE for the manner in which they have stewarded this work. I'd like to recognize the Oregon Commission on Autism Spectrum Disorders and members of the Screening Identification Assessment Work Group for their vision and persistence in pursuing these revisions. Once again, I urge the board to vote yes on these important revisions, and I thank you for your consideration.
Gordon Clay.
Chairman Martinez, Deputy Superintendent Gill, board members, and guests. For the record, my name is Gordon Clay from Brookings, Oregon. I'm an advocate for harassed and bullied students who aren't getting a fair shake regarding a safe educational environment, sometimes ending in suicide, another important area I'm concerned with. This is particularly important in small districts, particularly rural districts, where established groups in the local culture, the good old boys and the good old girls clubs, often have more influence on the district than they should have. A good example is policy GFCIA, drug testing, extracurricular activity participants, and specifically
I'm sorry, I didn't bring my printer cord. Okay. Specifically, the issue of random drug tests. With the high rate of opioid abuse in our culture and the high level of binge drinkers self-reported in the state's Pride surveys, ODE does not require schools to even have this policy. I would be interested in seeing how the impact on the high school sports programs are if the legislature actually required random drug tests and reporting the results. We have had over 20 years of the Pride survey that keep reporting problems as the students see them. But it seems their message falls on deaf ears. What over 200 students in the Brookings Harbor School District recently revealed in the SurveyMonkey should be a wake-up call for the school districts. It was outrageous what the kids see are actually going on in the schools beyond what they report in the Pride surveys. An ongoing problem involving the current system of handling complaints avoids a truly unbiased investigator not connected to a school district. This has proven troublesome, especially when a student is a whistleblower. Having peers investigating peers and administrators investigating union employees makes it particularly difficult to receive a totally unbiased investigation. I believe it often appears that the investigator, knowingly or unknowingly, is defending the district employee. There are no processes to challenge or question the results, even if it's taken to the ODE in cases that don't concern a protected class issue, since the complaint is returned to the school board that rejected the complaint in the first place. If it's a case involving a union employee, there seems to be an additional bias that works against the complainant or whistleblower. While the legislature creates the laws and OARs are adopted, there seems to be no oversight on how those laws are interpreted by OSBA, a trade group whose members are the school districts and whose overriding purpose is to do what's best for the school districts. A review of a good example of this is JFCF on the bully policy, which does not match SB 1555. I hope that the 2018-19 will see some improvement in the bullying and suicide prevention training and a change in the current complaint system so that once the doors are closed and the schools, kids are inside, that all Oregon students will be protected. Thank you.
So that's the end of folks who signed up. Is there anybody else in the audience that wants to come up that didn't sign up? Looks like we're done.
Okay, great. Moving on now to the consent agenda. George, did you have a clarifying question before we?
Yes, my board book just closed. I'm just curious whether or not the request for asset transfer for A3 charter school is a routine and action and consistent with previous actions in this kind of manner. Just, and I assume timing has something to do with it, just after reading it.
I don't know what the timing issue was, but we did discuss this in leadership, and given our past, the sort of specificity of the rule, I made the decision to add this to the consent agenda. This is sort of, this particular one is a routine transfer. But if you would like to have a discussion, we can certainly have it. We have discussed this in the past. This one just fit right in the sort of routine. So it was recommended and I approved it for the consent agenda.
No, I don't have a particular issue to discuss with it. It just seemed that it was a fairly substantial change and seemed to me, at least initially, to be more than routine, but I'm fine with leaving it on the consent item.
We can have staff come up and do a quick explanation.
Is the board in favor of moving this from the consent agenda just so we can have a little bit more discussion about it? why don't we just have a motion so we can move it?
Motion to do what?
Remove it from the consent agenda for a little bit more discussion.
Consensus to move it from the agenda, so I'm fine with moving to the consent agenda.
I just want to keep the consent agenda not for any lengthy discussion, but do you want to provide just a little bit of context for this, maybe Emily or Kate?
Chair Martinez, Deputy Superintendent Gill, members of the board. My name is Kate Pattison. I'm the charter school specialist here at the department. And part of what happens when public charter schools close, whether they're dissolved by themselves, non-renewed, or terminated, the assets of the public charter school are to be then transferred to the State Board of Education in terms of possession of those assets and then distributed to other public schools, districts, or charter schools. And it's it's never really a happy experience when that's happening. But we typically take the recommendation of the charter school, depending on the status of the school, or the recommendation of the sponsoring district on where those assets should go. And sometimes in the past, we have taken those assets, and I go around the state and host kind of yard sales, if you would, and make sure that other schools and districts have access to taking those assets and using them in their context. But when the school district is going to incorporate the school, or what was formerly the public charter school, into their district offerings. So we've had situations like where a public charter school was converted to a magnet school operated by the district, or the school was closed and converted to a program of the district, which this is that situation. The district has requested that those assets stay with the district so they can use them to serve those students, many of whom are the same students who were prior served in the public charter school. So that is what we have in this situation, where A3 Academy in Springfield was terminated mid-year, finished out the year kind of under the supervision of the district, and will continue on as a program of the Springfield School District, and they've requested those assets stay with the district to serve those students.
So given the history of sort of deference to the districts in the case where it's clear that the district has use for those assets, it led to me saying it's a consent agenda item under those conditions. Mm-hmm. If the district had not wanted them, or it was otherwise unclear, it would probably have not ended up on the consent agenda, just to clarify.
Right, and if the district doesn't take the assets, then what happens is they're the state board's property, and then you still have to decide who gets the assets, and so we'd have to designate other schools and districts being eligible to receive those assets, and then I would coordinate to take possession of all of the assets and then distribute them to whomever you determine they should go to.
So what would you like to do now?
I'm fine with the agenda. I assume that all of the students in the charter school are Springfield students, because it actually was converted from a alternative school previously.
I don't believe that they are all
residents
of the Springfield School District currently. I don't know what the future is about that.
See, that seems to be an important question. I would encourage you to consider at least pulling this for the consent agenda so we can have memorialized a fuller discussion. It's up to you.
I move pulling item 3B from the consent agenda to forward additional conversation.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Second by Anthony. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. So we'll come back to that in a second. Why don't we approve the rest of the consent agenda if there's a motion? Jerry?
Charles, I have just some logistic questions about the calendar, but I don't feel it's at the level of needing to pull it. Is there a way we could have a quick discussion?
You can raise a question, but if it's a discussion, we should probably pull it.
It would be a question.
Sure.
Okay. I wanted to ask on the retreat, which is the 15th and 16th, what the starting time would be on the 15th and the ending time on the 16th, and where it might be.
Yeah. Jessica Ventura with the Department of Education, board members. The agenda is still being worked on because we are going to go through a little bit of leadership change. We thought it was important to wait for the new chair to come in and kind of pen out most of the details of the actual agenda itself. With that said, typically in the past, the retreats start at 9 a.m. And they go through 5 p.m. And typically it's been 3 days. This has been shortened to 2 days, so I would expect those 2 days to be at the retreat from 9 a.m. all the way to 5 p.m. on both of those days. It'll be at the coast. I believe Zoe has sent out information already about lodging and who's going to need what during those 2 days. So if you haven't received that, definitely let her know so she can follow up with you. I hope that answers your question.
And then I have a second similar.
Yes.
Do we have any idea on the October 18, January 17, and April 18, which are possible travel dates for the board, where we are considering going?
That's a great question. I think that's a question that the board will be able to discuss at the retreat. When you talk about sort of board norms, operations, and so forth, as an opportunity for you to identify where you want to travel across the state. We obviously will take direction from you so we can get working on those specific locations.
That takes care of my questions, Charles. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other discussions? I forgot, what did I asked for a motion? Did I get a motion? Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
I so move.
Moved by Jerry, a second?
Second.
Second by George. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Kimberly, I don't know if we heard your vote.
I said aye, but I forgot to unmute.
Okay. Thank you. The consent agenda now is approved. Let's go back just to memorialize the conversation that we were having about the assets. George asked the question there at the end about the students, and it seems to be an important issue. George, did you want to follow up a little bit more on that question?
I was just curious in terms of the number of students that aren't actually Springfield students that might be attending the charter school from another district, and how that works.
So public charter schools do have open boundaries, and it is highly likely that students from surrounding districts were attending the charter school. As it converts to a district program, any students who would like to continue their attendance at the program will need to go through open enrollment or inter-district transfer process. And I would anticipate that districts would work with Springfield for appropriate placement and access.
Now you kind of got me going on this one. So theoretically, at least, if 10% of the students were from Marcola, wouldn't Marcola have paid for approximately 10% of the assets?
So funding follows students, and those students were in the care of the public charter school in Springfield, which was sponsored by the Springfield School District, and assets were purchased with public funds. And so those assets were made use in that Springfield public charter school, which is now converting to a district program. So students, public school students, would still have access to those public assets.
That's probably why the assets go to the state initially. Right? Okay.
Yep.
So my questions are answered. Thank you.
I'll just add one piece of information. So I do believe that the Springfield School District made this decision known to their students and community members in time for students and families to choose to go through the open enrollment process for next year. So there was opportunity. So they may continue to have students next year who reside in other districts.
You need a separate motion on this.
Yeah, we need a motion to adopt it.
I move to adopt.
Move to adopt by George, a second.
Second.
Second by Anthony. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay.
First readings.
Moving on to first readings, starting with item 4A, rules relating to institutions of higher education sponsorship of public charter schools.
So, Chair Martinez and members of the boards, items 4A and B are designated as no presentations in order to save time on the agenda. So we can move on to item 4C.
4C is modifications of OAR 581-021-0038 to include new provisions to HB 4150. That oozes policy in its title, right? All those numbers.
Oh, I apologize, but this was moved to an action.
Do you want us to come back for actions, or do you want to keep
You
it
want to
where
just
it's
go
at?
ahead and dive into
Yeah,
it?
right,
Okay.
we're right where it appears.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, great. Good morning. My name's Karen Moskin, and I'm a Civil Rights Education Specialist here in the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Unit of Oregon Department of Education. And it's nice to be here with you today. This last session, the legislature adopted House Bill 4150, and that House bill directed our board to accept rules, to adopt rules that are specific to the legislation that was passed. In 1999, our board passed at that time some minimum rules and requirements for how districts respond to sexual harassment complaints, but haven't been updated or modified since. And so this would be a modification of those rules, and not, it would be to amend existing rules and not just change new rules. So with that said, I want to pass out to you a copy of the bill, because some of the things that we're talking about are specific to the bill. It might be easier for you to see it that way. We reached out for public comment with this bill, and we heard from COSA, OSBA, the American Association of University Women of Oregon, and the Attorney General Sexual Assault Task Force, as well as Oregon Safe Schools Coalitions and the Student Association, as well as some parents who are also involved in some of this legislation. So what you will notice is that what the new rules talk about are a few changes that are specific to including students, staff, but also third parties, which before hasn't been included in everything, and third parties also include parents of the students as well. But also there could be other individuals who are third parties, maybe a contractor who's on campus or a volunteer or something like that, and they would also be included within these rules. Some of the public comments that we heard said that adopting the rules would be an initial step to providing a clear message that's needed, because as you'll see, some of the bill gets real specific about things that districts need to provide on as soon as a complaint is filed, and then how they respond to the complaint after that. And so they were worried about how districts would be able to handle or do all of that. ODE is planning on providing some technical assistance to school districts in being able to do this. We are hoping to be able to provide a template, as well as including it with trainings that we already give along these lines and within this topic. Another public comment that we received was that we have all kinds of rules that say somebody should do something, but that's different than saying that someone must do something. And so these rules change that wording from shall or should to must in areas that are specified within the statute. Also, if you look on, I kind of put a little green dot next to it on the second page of the House bill. Oh, and here's yours. You'll notice that on page 2 and number 4, it says that once someone is filing a complaint, there needs to be a written notification given to those complainants that includes the rights of the student or the parents or the staff member or persons or parents who filed the complaint. So what are those rights? What do they have? What kind of information? What are the things that they should be expecting to receive from the district? That should be very clear. So anything about that complaint process that districts are required to have should be available to them. Also notice that there are civil and criminal remedies available to them to use as well, and not just the school remedies, and that some of those remedies may be subject to statutes of limitations. So to make sure that those statutes of limitations are made known to the families. Also information about any services that are available through the district, like counseling or nursing services or any kind of peer advising or other advising or advocate services that are available. Any information that's specific to the privacy rights that students have, and when those exceptions to those rights within the internal complaint process are made. When is it that that type of really private information can be shared within the district, and who can share that. Also, any information about contact information, and also this includes community-based services and resources available to persons who have experienced any sexual harassment or sexual assault. And all of this must be in a written notification that's written in plain language that's easy for people to understand when they receive it, and using the print and color, size, and font that would make that accessible to all. So those are the main changes that we put within the rules. When we looked at the effects that this might have, I believe that we have many students, I can tell you from the experiences I have, we have many students who are victims of sexual harassment and don't report it. And in part, it's because they don't have transparent policies, and so they don't know what will or won't happen if they report it, and it makes it difficult for them to make those decisions not knowing what will happen to them or not knowing about what resources are available. So we're hoping that this will become more transparent, and will make it so that more are willing to come forward so that we can address issues as they arise within that, and so it would address more of the victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment as they come forward and report it. Some of the pieces that maybe should be considered are that this system of response to complaints is specific to sexual harassment and sexual assault, and not to all areas of discrimination. And so that may be confusing to members of the public. So do you have any questions for us at this time?
Don, first.
I have a couple questions here. I think when I was reading through it, so if a minor, a student who's not 18 comes forward, we're required to immediately contact their parents, I believe, if a complaint's been filed, Karen or Emily?
I believe that the statute says if applicable. So I don't think it's saying that that's required for all times or all cases. And I know that there are times when we make exceptions based on the safety of the student.
To not notify. I mean, if it's about let's say if it's from a student regarding a staff member.
So if a student files a complaint alleging
Against
sexual
a staff
harassment
member.
against a staff member, what is the obligation to report to the student's parent?
Parents, yes.
So that question is not answered by these rules, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head. We'd have to look at other things, but we can follow up.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I have a lot of questions.
Can you talk a little bit more about the third-party part of this? Because I think this is a really important nuance, and there are places where there's specific references to the sort of third-party, other people who are participating in a school event, whatever. I think it's captured both in the bill, but also in the rules. But I'm also aware that there's places where the language is specific to, like, this applies to students and staff members. And I'm aware that it's partly because as students are, of course, the source of our work in schools, and we establish student conduct policies, other things, and of course, staff are employees. But how do these things actually work as it relates to these third parties who don't necessarily have any formal relationship? There's not sort of personnel processes around them. There's not inherent sort of confidentiality rules that protect things. I know this sort of says that school districts will establish policies that include third parties, but it seems to open up a pretty big and complicated door as it relates to people who are simply interacting with the school. I'm very appreciative of that inclusion because they're not immune from the same kind of risk that anyone else who's involved in a school is, but it does seem to raise a fair amount of issues. And where I'm seeing, the like harassment provisions and things like this, they apply to students and staff, but of course not to these other agents, and yet they're also part of the policy. So can you talk a little bit more about that nuance?
The one thing I'll jump in and say is to keep in mind that part of what the rules are before you is there are some things that you have to put in rule because the legislature has adopted that. There are some places where you have discretion, and the third party piece, that's language from the bill. So that was a decision made by the legislature that they want this to be included. So
yeah, I'm aware.
I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind. But so under this rule, a complaint could be made by, or the policy has to cover complaints made by staff members, complaints made by students, and complaints made by third parties. And third parties is defined as those who are on or immediately adjacent to school grounds at any school-sponsored activity or any school-provided transportation or any official bus stop. And it's harassment by other students or staff members.
Yeah, I want to give you a more specific example. I'm aware that they're included, so that already makes sense to me. Districts already have policies protecting the confidentiality of complainants, particularly as it relates to students and staff. They're built into personnel and FERPA and other things. And they may or may not be referenced specifically as it relates to the grievance and complaint process because they're already sort of built-in machinery. And what I'm aware of is there might be more risk for a third-party disclosure of information when it pertains to a third party. It may not have the same level of sort of built-in protection. And so I'm just aware that there seems to be potentially places where there's nuance about how, if we just put the third-party lens around the kinds of complaints that could occur, that it seems like we should be really focused on, is there places where there might be vulnerability for disclosures or lack of protections, even though they're included in the complaint process, they're not typically protected, disclosures aren't particularly protected in the same way that other disclosures are because of law. So that's the kind of example I'm thinking of in my mind. I don't have a good case in my head of where this might be a leak, but I'm concerned about it, so I just wanted to put that out there.
And I appreciate the concern that you're expressing about what kinds of information can and can't be shared, and I would say that that's probably something that we can't necessarily address up front either, because that will be something that probably will end up being played out more so in the courts. It has been an issue in post-secondary education areas, and there are some specific statutes that are in place addressing the ability to share information and who is able to share information or who isn't able to share information from that level when someone discloses. So that may be something that we see moving down into the K-12 world, but at this point we don't have that. Having third parties included in the complaint process is not only required by the statute, but is also a federal requirement now in all of our complaint processes and procedures. So this is actually bringing us, after 1999, things have changed quite a bit. So this is actually bringing us into compliance more with those federal laws as well. But I would agree that that is something for us to be aware of, and maybe as we're looking at some of the ways that we develop our training with districts, that could be something that we research and include in some of that aspect of being aware of what that might be.
I'm very supportive of the idea of fixing this. I think it's important to fix it, but I'm aware that a non-student or non-employee who's involved in a complaint may believe they're entitled to the same kinds of protections that exist in the system, and I'm not sure that they are, and I'm worried that there could be exploitation or disclosures or things because people assume there's more protections for them in making a complaint than the system actually allows.
I absolutely
so
agree.
That's the concern I'm raising.
And I know that we have some statutes in place in the state that allow for confidential advocates, and that we have developed a system within each of the counties to know who those confidential advocates are. So that would be part of what we're talking about with where the schools share those community resources. And so it might be that we will say, hey, that they need to stop and say to those third parties, I'm somebody who is a responsible employee who needs to report this, and this is who I need to report it to. We're also mandatory reporters, so this is who we would have to report that to. But if you would like to have a confidential advocate who can talk to you about your rights, here's the person who can do that. So if nothing else, it at least allows that person to have those options to know up front before they decide to come forward.
George?
This is just an educational question for me. So was there a court decision in the last year or two? I'm curious where LGBTQ fits under the definition of sexual harassment, and does that fall under this, or is there a separate?
I believe
it falls under this. So any kinds of harassment or abuse that happens as a result of sex or sex stereotypes or not adhering to what would be considered a norm based on that sexual orientation of any kind, then that would definitely fit within this realm.
It's just not called out specifically.
Yeah.
Anthony?
Just a quick clarification question. You know, I heard about creating more, what does creating more transparency mean, actually? But you could just answer that, and what it means in this.
So in this case, what it means is that when someone initially files a complaint, we're hoping that it actually will happen before they file a complaint, because this has to be available to everyone in languages that they understand. So we're hoping that the word would get out before then, and that's really the main hope. But other than that, what we're hoping is that when victims see what the process is, or alleged victims see what the process is, that then they will be able to make the decision of whether or not they want to move forward. So if I'm a victim, a lot of times I don't dare to move forward because I have seen others where it seems to go down a black hole and nothing happens, or I might be getting retaliation or something like that. But if they know that these are the steps that will be followed by the district, this is the time frame in which it should take place, these are the other rights that you have, other places where you can go for help, and also a way to get some of those community supports in place that people might not know about otherwise, I think is at least a first step on getting to where we're hopefully helping more.
One more.
Yes.
Just the whole mandatory reporting. So does the victim have to do this, or can, I mean, you know, if there's a conversation between a student and a teacher about X, Y, Z, you know, can they file the, is that part of this, or is that something totally
Mandatory
separate?
reporting laws are
Totally
separate,
different, okay.
and certain people are designated as mandatory reporters. And if you are a mandatory reporter, then if you have information, you have to report. And it's not through your school district complaint process. You make a report to like DHS, I believe.
Or police.
Don?
A couple, I don't know if this is an Emily or a Karen. The new requirement that's requiring school districts on an annual basis 4 times a year to talk about these situations, would this be a prime subject to be able to talk with students and or staff about, you know, I'm trying to think about our transparency, getting the word out.
I think it's a great idea. That would definitely be a great place for us to talk to students about this very thing.
So for the board, if you don't, so school districts, actually it was this year, I think you're supposed to be doing it. I think
it
you're
was passed like
required
2 years ago.
four
Yeah.
times a year to go over certain materials and with students regarding all the way from grades K till 12, age-appropriate materials, and talk about that. And then my other question is, I know we've created a policy to hopefully make the complaint process easier for parents and students, and it's the maximum of, basically it's a 4-step process. Does that Does that blend into this?
So the complaint process that the board adopted, gosh, was it a year ago, I think, was for Division 22, retaliation, restraint, and seclusion. The complaint process that this would fall under is a different complaint process.
Discrimination.
It's discrimination, and we are in the process of looking at that right now, and we'll have something to you soon. But so those are two different complaint processes. And we had originally talked about combining them all into one, and what we're having to do is tease apart some federal requirements and different requirements, and they don't perfectly align, so we have to do it as two.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so we are looking to adopt this as a temporary rule because of the implementation, and this will return for more consideration in the fall as a permanent rule. Okay. Is there a motion?
I move adoption, temporary rule modifications to OAR 581-021-038 to include the new provisions of House Bill 4150.
Thank you.
I second.
Great, thank you, Kimberly. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much.
Now you're back to first readings, item 4D.
Thank you. It's hard to move my windows back around. Okay, the next up is on instructional time, OAR 581-022-2320. This is a first read on an ongoing discussion that we've been having. Welcome back, Emily.
Thank you. For the record, Emily Nazarov, Government Legal Affairs Manager here at the department. So as Chair Martinez mentioned, we've been having this discussion since January, and at the last meeting, the board directed me to begin the rulemaking process to put the targeted flexibilities that you guys have discussed into rule. And so today, we're doing a first read of that rule. Adoption would be scheduled in September. So we would have a public hearing on the rules, either July or August. We're working on scheduling that. And over the summer, I'll continue to do further outreach to stakeholders. So I'm going to walk you through what's in the rule before you today. So the first area of targeted flexibility that we talked about. Oh, I'm going to step back and note there are deletions at the end of the rule, and that is just we have finished the 4-year phase-in, and you don't need that language anymore, and so we crossed it out. So that's on the very end of the rule. But okay, targeted flexibility number 1. This is where we talked about excluding from instructional time requirements students who have already accumulated enough credits to graduate. The language that would implement that is in subsection 2A of your draft rule. During our stakeholder meeting that we had, stakeholders pointed out that this will likely only apply to students who are in the spring of their senior year. And so that's something for you to think about and think about, is that the right level of flexibility that you would like to provide? Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay. So then number 2, the second area of targeted flexibility was to exclude from instructional time requirements students who are entering their senior year and are on track to exceed graduation requirements. And the language implementing that is in subsection 2B. During the stakeholder meeting, we talked about, and we've talked about here with you, that we need an additional provision or additional language in here to clearly define what on track means. Stakeholders suggesting looking at indicators such as number and type of credits that have been earned. But we will be continuing that conversation with stakeholders, and I'd be interested to hear from you if you have thoughts on whether those are good indicators, whether there are other indicators we should be considering in deciding whether a student is on track. So maybe I'll go through them and then give you guys a chance to respond and ask questions. Also, you'll note that the targeted flexibility is limited to students who are on track at the start of their senior year. There was some discussion about whether that should be extended to juniors as well. the draft that I have here is limited to seniors because that's kind of the sense I had got from the board during our last meeting, but think about if that's where you want to be. The third area of flexibility, this is where we're providing flexibility for students who are on track to graduate and they are engaged in a type of learning that doesn't perfectly align with instructional time. And so we had discussed two options. You could grant a flat exemption for a list of activities, or you could require districts to apply for permission. Stakeholders were in favor of option 2. So a district would have to come and apply and say, these are the types of kids that we want an exemption for. I have concerns about creating workload issues for the board, and workload issues for the board and not having any sort of certainty for districts as they move forward trying to schedule. So the proposal that I have before you really implements number 1 and sets out a list of learning opportunities. So the downside of having a list is a district may come up with this innovative new idea and it's not included on the list. But keep in mind, districts still have the ability to allow 20% of students to be less than fully scheduled. So there is, that new innovative idea could still fit in that 20%. But option 1 resolves the workload issue and provides certainty for districts. So the list of opportunities that I've included are accelerated learning classes such as AP, IB, or classes at a post-secondary institution, internship or work experience opportunities, and credits by proficiency. Stakeholders also just suggested online learning, but we have a rule already that addresses how you count credits for online learning, so I didn't think that was appropriate to add. But think about if that's the right list of opportunities, and I'll be asking stakeholders over the summer if that's the right list, if there should be additional things added or something taken off. And then the last area of flexibility that we talked about was alternative programs. And there we had talked about 3 options. Either you could provide a flat exemption and say alternative programs, we don't take those, we don't count those. And remember, there's the statute that says that districts should provide flexibility with respect to time. So I feel like we're okay considering this. But you could do a flat exemption, or you could say we're going to exempt for 2 years while the legislature discusses this, or you could say that we're going to grant permission where a district either comes to us like a waiver type situation or meets these certain criteria. Stakeholders were in favor of the third option. Again, they want districts to come and make their case to the state board, and they see that as a protection, or I'm not thinking of the right word, right? I have the same concerns about workload. So trying to figure out how we can design this so that there's that level of protection, but we provide certainty to districts and we don't create a workload issue for the board. So what I did is I drafted a rule that's kind of like, if you remember the inclement weather temporary rule you guys did last year, where you said a district can ask for permission to count certain hours for inclement weather towards instructional time, and you set the criteria, and you said if the criteria is met, the deputy superintendent can grant that permission. So it doesn't come to the board, but you guys have established these are the areas where permission may be granted. And so I did that in this rule, and that's in subsection 3. So and I said permission would be granted where the request is made with the approval of the local school board. The district is using an evidence-based strategy that includes flexible time options, and the school district has implemented a system to assess students prior to placement to make sure that's appropriate. So are those the right criteria? And that's a question I'll be asking stakeholders over the summer, and I would love to hear your thoughts as well. So those are the proposed revisions that are before you now. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if you have questions.
Can I ask a question on, there's too many numbers here, option whatever, flexibility 3, option.
So the list of,
yeah, the list.
Yeah.
Option 1 is
Yeah.
the sort of prescribed list.
Yeah, and that's what I've done here, yeah.
So you mentioned work experience. You know, I'm concerned about option 3 and or flexibility 3 in general, just because I think the wider we open this door, the more capacity there is to have fewer students getting full schedules. So, but the work experience part in particular just seems to really create all sorts of potential for schools to justify any student who is employed to no longer be expected to be in school. And I think that's been an issue, and Anthony and I think, both have raised this issue Of course, students are working, and some of them need to work for lots of reasons, both the sort of career building aspect of work, but also because of economic issues in their families, and we don't want to be insensitive to that. On the other hand, I'm very concerned about sort of the implicit reinforcement to not be in school around that kind of issue. So I'm concerned about these places that just seem to open doors pretty wide in terms of what we're saying to students is it's okay if you're not in school. Instead, you can go work. And we're devaluing what being in school means for those students. So that's an example where this category in general is already, I'm uncomfortable with it, but that's an example where, depending on what's on the list, the door could be opened really widely or really more narrowly. So I don't know if you thought more about those sorts of labels and like, well, could that be defined in a more specific way or a more narrow way, and how would you do that for something like work experience?
Sure, and I think that that would be something I would reach out to stakeholders and say, what does it look like in the field? What do you call it? What are the different types? And come to a more refined word.
Don?
Just on that particular subject, so we've been talking about this with different stakeholders, and somebody brought up on one of our equity teams is for some of our kids, if it becomes between working and helping their families or going to school, would it actually have the impact of increasing dropout rates, because some of the kids, there was a talk that some of these kids are maybe going to choose their families over school if they're in that situation. That was just a counter to that.
It could happen. Yeah. That's true. It could happen. It just seems like we're saying something very explicitly to those students about the value of their education. That's what's concerning me. So I do understand that that's
the long-term impact on them.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, yes, those things could happen, and I would expect that the schools were doing everything they can in those conditions to make those the education accessible to students who are otherwise working. It just seems like a strange threshold to set, that we are saying as a system that it's an exception if you're working, despite the challenge that these students face, that education, getting enough instruction is no longer a value. So that's, again, that's just an example that's tough for me.
Chair Martinez?
Yes, Kimberly.
I'm wondering though if there's an element of the work experience that could become educational, and that there could be a requirement that it is some sort of proficiency test is given on a quarterly basis in that senior year to test learnings that are happening while in the work environment that pertain to the essential skills and necessary graduation requirements. So tie it back to the students' academic work that they're doing in that year, so that it becomes a learning experience and not just I'm working at, I'm just working to get money, but I'm actually working to get, I'll have to have a learning experience. If there's some way to build language in and requirements for that particular item on the list.
Yeah, there may be, and as Emily's pointing out, that way, if the board is supportive of that flexibility number 3, that would be work that could be done to sort of craft maybe some language as you described. And again, for me, I'm also being pressed against. There's already flexibility. There's already in the system. We've accounted for some of this nuance, and we still don't quite have enough. We're going a little bit on instinct. We don't know enough about how the flexibility has been used by districts, how many, what would change if we create these exceptions to the instruction time. But there's not a lot of data. This discussion has not been informed by a lot of data, just a lot of experience, which I respect. It's just hard. And so is there enough flexibility? How much of the flexibility we've built in accounts for all these things we described? And I'm hearing that districts feel like they need more, but I don't have any I'm not staring at any data that tells me that. So that's a challenge. This might already be accounted for. Do we need flexibility 3? For me a pretty significant question. Yeah, Anthony.
Maybe you have to re-educate me, but I kind of echo it. We have a timeline. Everybody knew what the timeline was, and again at the end of the 2018, 2019, then we again, correct me if I'm wrong. Districts out there, we need more flexibility, but I still don't see why. I haven't been convinced why, because is it a budget? I mean, you know what I mean? You hear a lot of different things, but I would kind of echo what Chart was. Where's the data on any flexibility at all needed? What happened, right? We were on track, again, in general, so stay with me. 2015, 2016, you know what I mean? No, we're good. And then all of a sudden, we need flexibility, right? So when it comes to work experience, I have a daughter. I mean, we probably all do that are working. I don't know if that's really, it's educational in the work environment, but not education in the education environment, right? I mean, she has to be there on time, do what she has to do, customer service. There's a mall out in Woodburn that everybody knows about. I mean, that's a minimum wage job for them? Okay. Is that the future of hers? No, I want her to go to college or get and so I guess what I would need to know is, I don't understand why we're even going down the flexibility road. I haven't been convinced yet. I see a lot of generalities, but maybe you can re-educate me or just kind of, summarize.
So I'll take the two. And first, the work experience thing, one idea, and I think, Kimberly, what you said sparked this for me, is with an internship, there are requirements that it has to be under the supervision and direction of a teacher. There could be, we could figure out a way to, I think what I was thinking was an internship always has to be unpaid, and that may not be true. And so take a closer look at, is there a way to define a work experience as, a learning opportunity that's under the direction and supervision? There are learning targets, there's check-ins along the way to ensure the child is learning something, but they're being paid. So I'll get the language right on that. Why we're going down this path for flexibility. So when the board adopted the rule in 2015 and we imposed the 4-year phase-in, and the last year is the only year that has this per school requirement, we had no idea at the time we were adopting the rule what the per school requirement looked like at each school and what the impact would be. And so the board put in the language in the rule that said every January the board would have a public hearing on the impact, fiscal and implementation impact of this 4-year phase-in. And at the January meeting this year, the board heard from stakeholders that the final year is going to be a problem and they wanted some flexibility. And so that's how we ended up in this place of looking at possible areas for flexibility. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the challenge there is, it seems like the biggest issue here is really in the per school issue, and I think that was going to be an issue no matter when it was timed. It's holding particularly high schools at an individual level accountable for instruction time is what's pressing this issue. And when we first had this discussion, and having just had my own kid move through this and spending a lot of my research time with kids at secondary level, I know that that's part of the issue, is that under before we had this discussion, before we implemented these instructional time specifics, there was the capacity for districts to make decisions that I'm just gonna, I know it's sensitive, but I'm gonna say disinvested in secondary education in the service of primary education. And we can point the fingers at funding and the legislature, et cetera, but those are the real world decisions that had to be made on the ground. And when you have to make priorities and you're looking at what happens in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade versus what's happening in 10th grade, and you have to make choices, you're forced to make choices. It's understandable that those choices lean on early learning and development for obvious reasons, and that meant that there were resources that were basically savings from having students not as enrolled in those secondary levels that were being used to supplement the educational needs of students earlier in the system. So I get that that's happened. It's not like districts were using those resources to do, take vacations and do, they were simply serving students as best as they can. Now push is coming to shove because we're forcing the system to be accountable at an individual school level. And that's where I think this has come to a head. Why it hasn't been a problem before is because even in the implementation, we didn't put it at the school level. Now the next rules without any adjustments do that, and it's just pressing the issue. So,
And the data that we do have is responses to Division 22 assurances that show us that most districts are going to meet the 92% district-wide, no problem. It's the 80% that is the problem.
yeah, so that's why I continue to be a very strong, even though it's difficult, strongly in favor in the most general sense with the instructional time rules that we worked on, as difficult as it is. We don't get to choose how funding works for those schools. We don't get to make those choices as a state board, unfortunately. I think if we did, this would be a different conversation. So I get that this kind of thing always comes off as unfunded mandates. Isn't that convenient for the state board to, push our hands without giving us resources? But we don't get to do that. It's not our choice. But being clear about what policy is and what kids need is our responsibility, and that's where this is difficult. I do continue to be supportive personally of some of those flexibilities that just seem obvious. When I start getting into this one, this is much more challenging for me. Anthony, and then
the 80%, is that really just high schools? I mean, everybody else is in, or there are little middle schools out there that aren't
We don't have any data. But what we have heard from stakeholders is that this is not a problem for kindergarten through 8th grade. This is only a problem at the high school level, and it's really only a problem for juniors and seniors.
But we don't have the data of how many high schools, of all the high schools in Oregon, what percentage are we really talking about?
Correct, I don't have that.
I wonder if there is there analysis that could be done that would get the board more information, even just modeling at a school level what the data look like for the last 2 years or something?
I don't have, what we have is a model that our staff created that would show for each school what it looks like to have 20% of kids less than fully scheduled. But I don't have, in order to get for you an answer that is, here's what is happening in each school district, we would have to go to districts and ask that question. Which if the board directs us to do that, we can do that.
It might be good to know how hard that would be. Like I can envision it being very hard or potentially not that hard, and that the districts might actually want to be able to tell the story with data instead of just the sense of this. And I do think it would be helpful to the board. But rather than just say we need that, it might be useful to get a sense of how.
I would probably
how easy
defer
that
to
would be.
Cole and the superintendents about what that ask would be like at this
Even
point
if what
in the year.
we did, honestly, what we could do is model it in some representative districts and pick a slate as opposed to trying to get data from everywhere that we think captures nuance around where in the state and size of the student body, that kind of thing, and use that as sort of a way of trying to get a snapshot. It is hard without the data to know how much flexibility is needed that's not already accounted for in the existing rule. Don.
Yeah, it's a complex issue. So we basically looked at it within Beaverton, and we had so we have 6 comprehensive high schools, and then we have our option schools. And we had one of the schools that would not have made the 80%. But when we talked with some of our high school principals and others, it's so much of a complex issue because depending on what school you're in, and some of us now have bargaining contracts that have class size tied with our contracts. And to your point, Charles, it's not like we're wasting the money. Some people are putting it more down at the elementary school, but even in some of the secondary schools, they're using that funding that's maybe not going to support full schedules in high school to serve some of our most historically underserved students in secondary schools with interventions. So there is a little bit of a worry out there across some of the folks that if we're forced to do this, we're going to have to, whether it could be increased class sizes, and some of those additional resources could be taking away from some of the students that most need some intervention services at some of those dollars. It's a complex issue, and I really think it really depends on kind of where you're at and what additional resources. But we will make it work in Beaverton, and then we talked about which students then do you tell you're not, even though they're on track to graduate, everything's lining up for them. Which students do you tell you're going to be required to have a full schedule?
Thank you for that.
How do you prioritize? So, to address your question, Charles, I think it will be challenging. So we've had districts that have offered their data through this process, through the stakeholder process, to try to demonstrate how challenging it is. My fear about doing kind of a sampling is that it is a true sampling, so that it is representative of a variety of districts who may or may not have even been engaged in this conversation, may or may not feel that it's an issue that they will struggle with. And so I'm a little bit concerned about just, even with an invitation, we would need to come up with a random sampling,
Yeah.
and then backups for districts that don't come through. And the timeline I'm a little bit worried about over the summer as well, because of our varying district sizes. Many districts would not be able to provide this for us through the month of July. Let us think about that, about what might be possible.
As a scientist, I'm concerned too about the sort of self-selection. You don't want to have districts who have a story to tell be the ones who present these data. You'll be really purposeful about that. But yeah, I do think that there could be some value in this, but there is a doability issue, which is why I'm not overly suggesting it until you do a little bit of that internal analysis. Okay. It is hard for the board, I think, to move on this without data to guide the decision. George?
And I don't know where I'm at on this one at this point, but I wanted to just, one of the graduations that I went to this year was Looking Glass's Riverfront Alternative School. And I make a point of going to it every year, one, because I'm on their board as well, but secondly, because it is one of the most gratifying graduations I've ever had the chance to attend. Because it's kids and their families who would not have probably made it in the regular schools, in the district schools, and they actually serve more than just one district. And quite frankly, one of their concerns over the past few years is that districts are really making a sincere effort to hold on to and bring back kids to try to help them be successful in the regular high school programs. But these are kids who otherwise would probably not be in school, and if they were, they'd be in and out, and their attendance would be spotty. They've got legitimate, life-altering kinds of experiences that make them able to be successful in a school that would never meet an 80% requirement, but where they get some of the individualized attention and focus on helping them achieve their goals of graduation. Sometimes that may be a GED as opposed to a regular high school diploma, but they are sincerely making an effort to be a high school graduate. And I worry where these kids would be and how they would affect your 80% if we do something different on this. Because I applaud the school districts who are saying, look, Because it used to be, quite frankly, the high schools in particular would push kids to those kinds of programs if they thought there was even a chance that they were not going to be real successful with them. And at least the ones that have been the traditional senders to Riverfront and Centerpoint schools and so forth have said, no, we've got to do a better job of hanging on to those kids, keeping them in our instructional programs and seeing them through to successful graduation. And sometimes that may mean that they can't be there full time. So I'm just sharing that story just because it's on my mind as I think about this.
I'm going to argue the other way, because we really toss this around, is that a lot of our students sometimes then they will, if they don't have full schedules, some of our students, probably not like you, but they'll say, well, I'm not gonna take any math my senior year or science or whatnot, and then when they do go on to higher education, and whether it's a placement test or whatnot, they're not prepared to go in there. So being able to stretch some of those students and make sure that when they go into, if they decide to go to into higher education, that they're prepared and they're not frustrated, and maybe we wouldn't have as many kids dropping out, and help the whole system. We talk about a seamless system, so I think there's arguments to be made in both areas. So it's a complex situation.
Well, one thing that's come up, and I know it's in all of our minds around this table too, is, and this is if we can figure out how to deal with the data issue, another thing that we could look at is who's being impacted most by any of these decisions. And I could, depending on how I frame this, I don't know right now which kids are most vulnerable to decreases in instruction time. How does that co-vary with socioeconomic status, poverty, race, ethnicity, gender? These are important questions, and if we're creating flexibility, who will benefit from the flexibility? I think is important to be asking. So I am curious about that. Like I do think the on track to graduation issue is probably not going to be randomly distributed by demographic group, particularly if we're looking early in the entrance to senior year. And so I could say, well, if there are higher socioeconomic status students who are on track to graduate, which seems like a reasonable hypothesis, that it could be that those savings could be used to support students who have more economic disadvantage. But I don't know. So there's a lot of the story that's just not being told because we don't have that snapshot. So I do think that there is, if we can figure out a way to do it, some of that might be helpful. And if possible, we could actually even, depending on how quick or what kind of sample we could draw on, we could even look at some of those data at the retreat, so that we wouldn't, it wouldn't necessarily cause us huge delays in action. Jerry?
I was wondering if Lynette, if you would be willing to talk a little bit about yourself and what you see at your school in terms of the use of the senior, somewhat the junior year, but the use of the senior year by students, and a feeling about having students fully taking coursework right through their senior year, fully present. Your thoughts, what would you advise us on this?
So I had a full IB schedule my senior year. So I was in school from 7 to 3:30 or 3:10 every day because I had a 0 period class. And part of my concern with the full IB program is that I was only with students who are also in full IB, so I didn't really get to know students beyond that program. But even in students who are in full IB, their senior year, they still had room in their schedule to have off campuses, though some students didn't have a full schedule. But from my understanding is that this year we had a lot of cases with mental illnesses, and this was the year where we had a lot of cases with depression, particularly severe depression. And we, at the end of senior year, we had a lot of students drop out of full IB because of that. And also just students started to, we have a lot of students in IB who are juggling full IB with the job. And so I know that some students are not fully scheduled because of that job. And I know that some of my friends personally don't, I think that there's this level of ignorance, as in like they don't know if they're prepared for, or they believe that they're prepared for certain classes in university. So I know some people who are not taking a math class, or who did not take a math class this year because they didn't feel like they needed to, because they already finished their graduation requirements, but they will need to later on in university. And so one of my friends was concerned because she did not take calculus this year, even though she could have, but she already did have her graduation requirements. And so my concern for her would be, is she prepared for taking calculus at the university level or at the college level, even though she missed out on a year of preparation her high school year. And I mean, I know students who did take calculus this year who may be taking the same class again in university, but I mean, even though it's the same class, it will be taught at the university level, and that can, that can be a lot different. But I think that they're not aware of their own preparation, and they're also not aware of the requirements that they will need to have at the university level. So I don't know.
That's a follow-up.
Colt, I'm aware. Yeah, Jessica's getting nervous over there. We're behind time. Colt.
I have a follow-up. So is this the first year you've taken a zero period, or have you done that previous years as well?
I took that last year as well because I have top-notchers, and so. But I know students. We had a math class. We had an extra math class that a lane teacher came and taught my sophomore year too, so there was that. Yep. But that was only for about 3 weeks.
So, and the reason I bring that up is that, so Lynette, if I've done my math correctly, is graduating with 34 credits.
I think I have over 34 credits.
So over 34, so probably some other pieces on top of that. So one of the things that I worry about when the way our instructional hours work, we say fully scheduled. Fully scheduled at different high schools in Oregon means a very different thing. So fully scheduled in some districts would mean that you graduate with 24 credits, some of them 28 credits. In this particular high school, 32 credits would be a full schedule. Overscheduled like Lynette, then you get into additional credits. So I do wonder about how this impacts district to district, and if it's really instructional time that we should be focused on, or access to credits and courses. And I know that takes us in a completely different direction, but when we're saying it's instructional time, then we're saying in some districts, if you end up going to Beaverton, I think they have an 8-period day, then you're graduating if you have full instructional time every year with 32 credits. And if you end up in X district, then you end up with 24 or 28. And we then have students leaving based on the district that they attended, no fault of their own, leaving the system with varying different levels of credits.
It is an important point. So right, is it about courses and credits, or is it about instructional time? I think, or instructional days, hours. The reality is, the instruction time is that we could at best think of it as a proxy. It's like, it's a very indirect influence on a variety of things. It's a proxy. So right, is it the best proxy is, I think, Colt's question. I think it's a good question to ask. This is sort of where we've decided to move. Could we think about it in even a deeper way? I would rather get to quality of contact, quality of instruction, the actual learning experiences that students need to be successful, rather than counting hours as if each one has the same quality or the same, simply a linear relationship with graduation success, which doesn't exist. So I think it's a fair question.
And it could be one of those where there are implications where, because of the resource level in Oregon and districts needing to make choices, we may be inadvertently forcing districts to move towards certain schedules that allow for them to fully schedule. So they may move away from 8-period block schedules to 7-period days so that they can accomplish this. And then there is a reduced access for some students in some districts. But
I'm not sure Emily has that much of sentiment, other than we've talked about lots of issues.
Clear as mud. No, I'm kidding. I feel like I've had good feedback from you guys, and I have an idea of where you are wanting more information and where I need to continue to work. And I think I told Colt this before this meeting. When I bring a rule to the board for a first read, I feel like it's fully baked and I'm good to go. I don't feel that way in this case, because it was a pretty short time between, you guys saying go forward with rulemaking in this meeting, but I have the whole summer to do continued outreach. So I think that there's a lot of work to do still.
And I would just continue, I appreciate receiving items like this, by the way. So it might make you slightly uncomfortable in a way, but this is one of those cases where I think the board would be served by not having a simply, here's our final recommendation, but instead at the end, here are things that you could do, and they have advantages and disadvantages that you'll need to decide together as a board, and I think that's okay in this case.
Yeah, and that's why I put no recommendation from staff at this time, because I really see this as work that you guys are driving, and I am simply providing you with sort of memorialized, this is what I'm hearing from you each month, so you're driving this work.
Yeah, I think this is one of those issues where it makes sense. We need staff's perspective on what the advantages and disadvantages will be, and if there's a staff recommendation that leans us one direction, that's always helpful to hear. But this is one where I think it's okay that the board will have to sort out this, because we're clearly we're not sure where, or we're not sure at the moment, do we need to have more flexibility, and second of all, if so, where. My personal sentiment is in sort of that option 1, option 2 range. I want to talk more about option 4, which we didn't get a chance to talk much about, and I'm concerned about flexibility 3.
Sorry,
Erica,
I didn't want to
please.
butt in on anyone's conversation there, but I just wanted to say that OEA is in support of all of the flexibility requirements that are in place as they currently stand. Some of the things that we talked about recently when you brought this to the attention of the board regarding alternative programs, and they were really appreciative of the language surrounding alternative programs specifically. They had some questions again about work experience, just like the board has been discussing. However, I think there are some things that are in place around an internship that could be placed on work experience that would allow for the career-related learning experience to mesh over, so that it'd be like the difference between a paid internship and a non-paid internship, that would allow for some career-related learning experiences that might satisfy some of the things you're asking for. But OEA is in full support of the flexibility.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Erica. Kim?
I would just like to say that I think there's already built-in flexibility. It's only 80%. Districts can ask for waivers for certain schools, or they can adjust their schedules. The Parents Coalition submitted a memo that I think is very persuasive, and I don't think we need any changes.
Thank you. And that Parent Coalition letter is in the board docket, so hopefully everyone had a chance to review that. If not, it's in your docket.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I'm sorry, I'm flipping my windows here again. We're on to item E, and we are 20 minutes behind schedule, and we need to be out of here by 4. So that's just so you know, that's the path that we're on. Item 4D is related to, 4E is related to Division 22 reporting.
Emily Nazarov, Government Legal Affairs Manager here at the department. So this rule is, staff is bringing forward this rule to you for your consideration. This rule that we've got here is the rule that governs Division 22 reporting by districts. And we have done some work over the past year to provide greater transparency and to kind of improve this rule, but we have an additional thing for you to consider. So 2 complaints came in this year about whether districts were in compliance with Division 22 as they had stated on their assurances. And as I was digging in and trying to figure out what was going on, I realized that there is some confusion in the field about which year a district is reporting on. And so I'm proposing that we add language that specifically states that a district is reporting for the preceding school year, that they are in compliance. So when a district reports, on this date, what they're saying is, for the last year, we met all of the Division 22 standards. The second piece is, when we started talking about how to manage this, looking at the logistics of currently, for the 2017-18 Division 22 assurances, districts were reporting on the 2016-17 school year. They report in February. It takes a few months for us to get all the data gathered up, figure out, review the corrective action plans that were submitted, and get back to districts, and it's the beginning of summer. And they have until September 1st, basically, to be in compliance, the beginning of the next school year. And that's difficult, right? By that time, you've been out of compliance for a full year. So we talked about, if we're saying should we have districts report in June? And say, we have completed the school year and we met all the Division 22 standards. The rule says that you have to be back in compliance by the beginning of the school year. We collect all the data, clean up the data, review all the corrective action plans. We're past the beginning of the school year, and now by the time we issue the notices that you're not in compliance, you now have a full year to get in compliance. So where we landed, and this is the proposal to the board, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is that districts would report October 1st to their community and October 15th to the department. That shortens the amount of time, so then they would be back in compliance by the following school year, but that gives districts the opportunity to get their full report in, and we have time to do our Division 22 assurance work. So that was the thinking of this proposal. So districts would be reporting on the preceding school year. That's clarified in rule. Report would be due to the community October 1st and to the department October 15th. Any questions or concerns?
Kim?
I have some major concerns about, I think this is a huge change to our rule. And it doesn't address the equity issues. It doesn't address the fact that parents don't really care about the prior year, they care about the current year, and it makes it more difficult to file complaints. The president of the Oregon Association of Talented and Gifted put together a very detailed memo on why this change should not be made. If anything, it should be clarified that it's for the current year.
And that comment came in at 10:30 last night, so it's not posted, but I did.
So I think
It's been posted. Oh, did it get posted?
It was posted, but I think we need stakeholder input. The board didn't seek this change. This came about because I started catching school districts who had claimed that they were in compliance when they weren't in compliance. So that's how this came about, and their excuse was, oh, we thought we were reporting for a different year. So the board didn't seek this. There's no stakeholder input. I think we need to put on the brakes and clarify that it's for the current school year.
George?
And I'll ask Don and Jerry and even Colt. I guess I have to say, when I was superintendent and had to do this and take it to the board every year, that I was always thinking it was stating we were in compliance for that current school year, not the previous year. I don't know what other folks thought.
Yep, Colt.
Yeah, I would say for me it wasn't, because you're reporting on instructional hours which aren't complete.
Right.
And you don't know if you're going to have, in that time we've even had snow days come after that. You also don't know about things like heaters and things like that that go out at schools, or power outages. And there are other pieces that that are time sensitive. So you do health screenings, so you're ensuring that you completed those. And so if those haven't come around to every school, you're just saying, yeah, I'm in compliance this year, but the year hasn't been complete, so you don't really know.
February.
You're doing it in February, yeah. So the year's not over, but yet you're guaranteeing that
Yeah, I guess
your
I always
instructional
assumed
hours
it
are
meant
there.
We're currently on track and.
Yeah, I mean, we could say that kind of language, we're on track to, but that's not a guarantee.
But yeah, to me, I you know, having been a local board member, I think I will tell you from a local board perspective, I think I interpreted superintendent's discussion of compliance as being in real time. So that's also happening for school board members. So, and I understand the point here, which is that the assurances of compliance without having all the data, there is a sort of a lag when you have all the data available to assure compliance. But in the real-time situations that might be going on in a school district, in those moments, for a superintendent to say we're in compliance when something's going on right then in that district is strange, because it actually doesn't feel good as a superintendent, I suspect, because it doesn't feel accurate. So the question might be, is there really a two-part to this? Is there an assurance of compliance from the prior year that's clarified? And is in that February report a report of the data that we have up to this point in the year? We can't ensure compliance until all the data are in, but here's sort of the February report. I think that might be a sort of transitional report. Would require two things from a superintendent, but it seems like it would be maybe more authentic also, right? So that might be a solution. I do understand the problem, but I do also see that it doesn't reflect what's really going on that year. Just a second, Don and Jerry, do you have thoughts about this too, just from a superintendent standpoint?
I kind of agree with Colt is trying to figure that out. And the only other thing I'm thinking is, Emily, so what we try to do is when the Division 22 standards come out, definitely meet with the various department heads and we assign the specific standards to that specific department and say, okay, I want you to go through there. We want to find out where we're either deficient or we're meeting, and gather that evidence to make sure that that's happening, and just making sure that there's enough time for it to happen, whereas you're just not signing that, you're just signing it off and really not doing the work to be able to look in and see if are the assurances really happening, or is this just something where people are just signing off and they're going and you're really not looking at the evidence
And
to see if
the context that these two complaints that Kim mentioned rose in, I think, is kind of instructive. We had the change in the complaint rule that January 1, districts had to have on their website a link to the complaint. So if Dawn describes, you hand out, because you do your report to your staff, to your board maybe January, so I'm assuming you hand out maybe in November or December to start this work.
Yep.
If staff sign off in November and say we are currently in compliance, by the time it gets to the department in February, you're not in compliance anymore, and then did you lie? It causes a problem for districts. So that's the context that this arose in, if that helps.
We use prior year data, but we were reporting on the current conditions of the year we were in. And in some of the questions on Chapter 22, you have to extrapolate for the current year whether you'd be in compliance or not. But it was always reporting on the status quo right now.
So maybe that like the two-part is the reporting on assurances for the prior year and the sort of current status report.
Yeah,
It's sort of both of those things.
The data's
Actually,
from the previous year.
using the previous year data, but indicating to the board on each one of those where we are currently in this year.
Yeah. Let me go back
Okay,
to
all right.
no, I'll come back to you, Cole.
So if we're supposed to be looking at this through an equity lens, and in my view, the Division 22 requirements a lot of them are for our most vulnerable. They've been put in place to protect the most vulnerable students. And so I think if we're going to make any change, we definitely need to look at how that affects the most vulnerable students in our district, the special education students, the discrimination complaints, those sort of things. How will they be affected, and how can they correct a problem where they're not being served?
I was just going to add, so that I'm looking right now at when we were talking about sampling earlier. So we're sampling 3 people who have been superintendents for a long time. And probably, I'm guessing for all 3 of you, our time as superintendents predated this system. It went back to a system where we had Division 22 assurances visits that happened every few years. And in that process, and in my districts that I led this effort in and that you did, we did much what Dawn described. So we had the list of Division 22 standards. We kept physical notebooks. We asked people to go out and get evidence to place in those, not just check off the box that it was completed, but there's standards around notifying 11th and 12th graders about their progress towards graduation. So we would get those sample letters from the counselors, and they would fit into this notebook so that when we had our Division 22 visit, we were prepared, and the folks could come through and check off to see whether we actually had evidence of compliance. What I don't know is that most superintendents in Oregon don't have the level of experience that these folks have, and we are in a system now that is based on this assurance. So everybody has the set of rules. They know that every year they're supposed to share with their board whether they're compliant with those. So I don't know that they're thinking about having evidence, and if you have evidence, it comes from the previous year because that's the most recent. Today we're in a system where the districts provide this assurance. We believe that assurance unless there's a complaint that comes forward, and then we take action, or unless they report that they're out of compliance. And that happens every year, and they come up with their plan. But it would be nice if we were actually back to a system where we could provide more guidance, and that there was the ability for us to direct districts to really show the evidence, and that we could go in and visit. But we're just not in a place where we have the staffing to do that every 3 years or 6 years. So.
Don?
And just to Colts, having worked in small districts and large districts, smaller districts, which represent most of the districts in Oregon, sometimes where you don't have the capacity, Colt, right. They don't. I think a lot of times, and I think back when I was first a superintendent, and I will tell you, I shun it probably because I signed those assurances without doing a lot of deep checking to make sure that they were being accomplished. So just that capacity. So somehow trying to figure out how the assurances can be timely. And at the same time, when somebody's signing that, just to be able to be honest and review them. And there's a lot of assurances there. If you're doing absolutely everything in Division 22, you're kind of walking on water.
So we're 35 minutes behind. Emily, do you want to, since this is a first read and there's been a fair amount of discussion, do you want to just clarify, including some discussion about the need to engage and listen? What's your plan before this comes back to the board at this point?
I guess, something I put in the docket is if you adopted this rule in September, you would be changing the reporting requirements for districts a week before they're due. So that's something to think about. Are you interested in moving forward with this type of a clarifying rule, or would you like me to go a different direction or hold off? I guess I'm looking to I'm bringing this to the board because we recognize that there's an issue, and I'm looking to you for direction on how you want me to move forward.
I guess we should be clear that part of the issue is that the documentation that districts are asked, nowhere in it does it say whether you're reporting on current year or previous year.
It seems important to me to clarify. I actually think the lack of clarification can be misleading to our parents and students who are vulnerable. So,
And then you get into arguments about whether someone really is or isn't telling the truth, and it's
so
it could be solved.
I do believe there is a need to create more transparency about this issue. But I think the goal is to provide as close to accurate real-time information as we can in the disclosure and assurance process. So,
Okay.
and you know, this doesn't seem to yet quite capture that based on the discussion we're having. So, and I do think the engagement, the stakeholder engagement, will be important. But I do see the problem here because I do think it could be confusing and actually lead to more concern out there by parents who really need to know if this assurance is being provided and it's inconsistent with their experience, why. I think it makes it easier for superintendents to disclose in a more authentic way, perhaps as well. So, but the way it's written now seems like it needs some work. Jerry.
I think this is a really important accountability piece, and that it deserves not only some look at, timing and year, but just an overall review of the process. And the way it is now has really changed from what Colt talked about. We spent 6 months, and as you said, the physical notebooks we had, we took teachers' mailbox kind of approach things, and we had these boxes that we were getting information in this whole time. And the report to the board was a full work session. Now, I think it's changed a great deal. It doesn't seem to have the significance that it did, and I'm not into creating a whole lot more work for people, but I do believe it's a significant piece of school improvement data that can be utilized. And back in the old days, superintendents used this to leverage the board to do things that weren't in place. For example, my first school district was out of compliance with HIV/AIDS information and sex education. And using this, we were able to move forward from a barrier that I'm not sure I could have overcome in that first year. So we'd love to see maybe a bigger discussion around this.
Kim, final comment.
A quick one. So Colt, you had mentioned that we don't have capacity to enforce Division 22. I feel that it's not been a priority. And I think if this board sent the message that you're sending, that this is a priority, that these Division 22 requirements are in place to protect students and to provide a strong education for them, then this board could make it a priority and they could find the capacity. And I hope this board will.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I apologize. But, so I just want to be clear. I didn't say we don't have the capacity to enforce. We do enforce it. I said that the model has changed over the years with a change in capacity. So the model is different. It's based on the assurance process, and it's based on complaints and self-reporting. It's no longer based on visits to school districts.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Emily. We are officially 41 minutes behind. We're going to move on now. We may or may not get to all these items before lunch, and I'll have to put my head together with Jessica to ensure that we can still meet our 4 o'clock deadline here. But we'll move on to items for action now, starting with temporary rule on dyslexia-related training and universal screening for risk factors of dyslexia.
Emily Nazarov, Government Legal Affairs Manager. I'm here for Carrie Thomas Beck, who is presenting at a conference. And these are 2 technical fixes to the rules that we need cleanup on. And so we're asking for temporary rules. So as you know, this dyslexia work, we've been doing it for about 2 years, getting ready for what will start this fall, which is districts have to start screening kids for dyslexia. And as we are approaching this, so you have adopted a lot of rules, and we've done some really good work, and we have found 2 areas that need cleanup before we launch everything this fall. So the first one is we had originally included some language in one of our rules where districts can ask for a waiver from the teacher training requirement that includes state or day or residential treatment programs. The requirement for dyslexia screening does not apply to those programs, and so it was an error to include that in the waiver language. Because it's in the waiver language, it causes confusion for folks that maybe the requirement does apply to them, and so the temporary rule just strikes that language from the waiver provision. The second area where we need a temporary rule is the department was charged with, and the state board was charged with identifying a list of screening tools that districts would use starting this fall. And the Dyslexia Advisory Committee had recommended that students be screened in their native language when possible. And so we had drafted rules that said districts have to use a screening tool from our list for English and Spanish. And then for other languages, there's a waiver process that allows a district to identify another tool that's going to be used. Well, we just went through our process of evaluating screening tools, and none of the Spanish screening tools met the criteria that was established by the board. And so the proposal before you would strike the language that says you have to use a Spanish screener from the department list, and would allow Spanish screeners to be developed or chosen by the district based on certain criteria. And so it would treat Spanish screeners the way we treat screening tools for other languages. So those are the two proposals. They're temporary rules, which means we would be back in September and October to ask for permanent adoption. And the reason we're asking for temporary is so that these changes are in place when districts start their screening in the fall. Any questions?
Okay, hearing none. Is there a motion?
I move that we move forward with the staff recommendations under this particular item.
Move for adoption by Jerry, and a second?
Second.
Second by George. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now we're on to a slate of charter schools. We're on item 5B, Cottonwood School of Civics and Science 5-year charter contract.
Yes. All right. Wait. Chair Martinez, Deputy Superintendent Gill, members of the board. I'm Kate Pattison, Charter School Specialist at the department. And before you today, we have the second reading and adoption of the Cottonwood Charter Schools 5-year charter contract. So we've been here many times over the last few months going through the renewal process. We did a first read of the charter contract announced before you for adoption. In this packet, we have the 5-year charter contract, which includes the performance framework as an exhibit that would be used to evaluate the charter school's performance over the next 5 years. And in that, it details what the performance expectations would be in academic, financial, and operational areas of the school. We've also included additional information regarding the waiver request that the Cottonwood School has put before the board, which we've included in the charter contract. And so this is before you today for final discussion and hopefully an adoption.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Our conversation last time around these had a fair amount to do with the waiver requests. Do you want to talk a little bit about the work that went on in terms of the waiver request?
Sure. So we went back to the school and asked them to complete a letter that is in similar format as other public charter schools going through the waiver request process. And so you can see now we have that waiver, and it does address some of the questions and areas that the procedure for asking for waivers asks the charter schools to address, which include equitable access, costs of programs, and the development of high-quality programs. And so those pieces are included in here. The charter school has, in an attempt to address some of the questions about student diversity, staff diversity, and ongoing data tracking included information about their outreach to the surrounding areas. There's some affordable housing in the neighborhood. They're including upping their recruitment at community events and Head Start programs, as well as considering a weighted lottery in the future. They've also included their lottery application, which has some data collection pieces so that they would be able to address and bring back to the board specific data about the impact of this waiver, whether or not it would actually be creating access, limiting, whatever, but the data that would be nice to be able to present and say this is how the trends have been in terms of who's applying to the school and who's getting in through the lottery has not been something we've typically advised all charter schools in the state not to collect that information on the application, so that there's never the question of whether a student was discriminated against based on that information that was provided during the application process. And so the charter school is now including that in the application as an optional point of data so that they can collect that and know whether or not who's actually applying and who's getting into the school.
Last time we also had kind of a general conversation, a specific conversation. I have continued to be concerned about the granting of waivers in the case of staff and board members, et cetera, for charter schools based on the board's work over the last couple of years. I also get that we've not been, as a board, we've really not decided to be really clear about if there are parameters in which a waiver is granted for staff and board members, founders, whatever. We haven't been clear about what are those conditions that meet our equity lens and our goals as a board and what aren't. So in some ways, I feel like we have not done a very good job of being clear with the charter schools and with ODE staff about what are really the conditions in which a waiver will be granted around staff. I think the acknowledgments of the outreach are really helpful, but they don't actually get to the core issue, is how would this waiver enhance access to the school or equity in the school? That story is not being told, and you're right. We don't have the data to go how many kids are being denied who otherwise would get in because of staff. We know that I think in this case, it's 2% over 5 years of slots would be held for staff. Is that accurate? I think
that
that's
is
accurate.
true.
So on one hand, I could say, well, that's a low impact, but I don't really know is that the right threshold for low impact? Is it 1%? Is it 5%? What if there are data showing that there's a massive waiting list of students from disadvantaged backgrounds who would want to get in? Would that change the narrative? These are things that we just have not decided as a board, and I continue to be concerned about these waivers, but I also feel like we haven't been clear with our schools or with staff about what we're seeking here. So I want to say that out loud. It's complicated. Is it fair to deny the waiver when we haven't been clear and that the impact seems relatively low in this case? Is another important question here. So, but the issue is concerning to me, and I have a basic equity problem with simply granting exceptions for staff and founders and board members for these charter schools just because they're staff members. That's a problem, a basic problem for me. So I just want to put that out back to the board, and then hear any other comments that you have.
I do have one thing, if I may.
Yes.
Having worked with a number of charter schools now over the last 8 years and observing schools in practice and organizational aspects, as well as instructional, different innovative models, and then of course looking at student data and having very courageous conversations about equity, racial equity, and different pieces in the schools over the last few years. One of the things that I have really wrestled with in trying to put these before you is how complex and interconnected these pieces are. We know that teachers are the biggest factor affecting, what students are able to do and learn in the classroom settings. And so this is a school, and the reason why, as far as staff bringing this to you, one of the kind of professional rationales that we've used in this process for this particular waiver is knowing that this school is a school that is organizationally sound, financially sound, and academically sound, and is serving students well across all demographics. Being able to support at a very small degree instructional stability and program stability, while there may be an overall decrease by a very slim margin of access to seats, those students who are getting in through the lottery will potentially have an access to a better, higher quality program that does actually serve them well. Whereas, and I understand, then if you don't have that, and it's difficult for the charter school in its current context of where charter schools find themselves, which is very slim funding and very high cost locations, it is incredibly difficult, especially in the metro area, to retain high quality staff. This school is recognized as a school that is doing very innovative, extraordinary practices that are serving students very well. And in order to retain those staff, I mean, so that is the piece in front of you, and I understand completely that it's intersectional in many ways.
Well, and my recommendation to the board is that we really take this up in a work session that can lead to more specificity. So if I take Kate's argument, I could also say, aren't there lots of public schools that are doing great things with kids, are serving them well, are meeting positive outcomes for demographically diverse groups of students? Why would this school get the additional perk of guaranteeing a seat for staff children? And the argument might be, which may be where you're headed with this, that yeah, there are lots of schools like that, but this school is doing something that those schools don't. This school is reaching an audience that those schools can't. I think that's sort of an equity argument that might work, but being high quality doesn't for me. Being good at serving diverse groups of students doesn't for me either, because I know there's plenty of schools out there who are doing that don't enjoy this benefit. There are reasons why staff work, why founders found charter schools, why teachers choose to work there or not. I'm just really sensitive to this issue, and I think there could be a case, but I think we need to be clear about what that is. If the case can be made that without that, a school like this couldn't exist, and this school is serving a population of students that simply can't be served in any other way because of the level of innovation. It's doing something so remarkable. Maybe there are thresholds we could talk about. Being good is not, for me, this doesn't rise to that. So, you know, in the past when we've granted these, the nuances have been things like the board is very diverse, their teaching staff are very diverse, and those seats are also, you know, increasing the diversity of the school. So that is an equity argument. We have talked about those things in the past. So those might be things, again, we could be clearer about in conversations with Kate and ODE. I think we owe it to the schools to figure out what we really mean, where we're really going to stand on this. And right now we keep on coming back to the same issue, and I think it's not a good process for anybody. And I don't think it's fair to the schools to keep them in the dark about what is the justification we're looking for on this kind of thing. George?
Two things. One is a question. For non-state sponsored charter schools, ones that are sponsored by districts, for example, do those have these kinds of provisions? The number of those have these?
Right, so you have 2 additional waivers today that you're considering that are district-sponsored charter schools.
School district sponsored. So, Charles, I agree with all of your comments. My struggle is always that, you know, when the state and the legislature provided for charter schools, that they knew that they were providing for schools that were going to be in some ways unique and different intentionally from our public schools, and knew that they were going to be, I think, creating these kinds of issues. And, you know, that charter schools, well, for whatever reason, were intended to do things that are different from our regular public schools. I don't know that I agree that that's right, but when the charter school movement started, it was so that they could do things that were different and supposedly unique from what the neighborhood school, for example, was doing. And, you know, we had these discussions in Eugene for many years, because within the district we had what were essentially charter schools that were called something else. So I struggle with this. I actually think that maybe what we ought to do is have the conversation about the waivers and the 2% and getting the kind of information that your questionnaire is going to provide, so that we can, a year, 2 years down the road, 3, see what kind of impact it has had on admission for kids from different demographics and so forth. So.
Yeah, those are good points. And by the way, we have, in reviewing the charter school renewals, consistently as a board looked at the question as what is innovative about the school. And we've pushed, in my experience over 5 years, we've pushed if there was questions about, yeah, they're doing good things, but is it really innovative? Is it really, you know, fulfilling the charter? Because that's been a very important issue for the board. So we have been focused on not just creating good schools, but doing things that really are innovative. And being good was not been adequate for at least this board in our discussions about renewals. So, and in this case, we're not really talking about I mean, my issues are not about the renewal. I hope that's clear. They're really just about this nuance. And I am pressing the board to take this up in a more specific way, because I think we need to. We owe it to ourselves, but also to staff and to the schools that we're working with on this. And these are different. Like these 3 that we're looking at are different. Like the second one's easier for me to deal with, because I can see in it what the waiver does as it relates to something like equity. It's easier to see than it is when it's related to staff. Okay, any other comments, questions?
And
George?
it may be included in their case. Is there a timeline for when the board might, or you might get the first initial information about the impact that the practice is having
Sure.
on admissions?
We would know starting next school year. So we would have information. When do you do your lottery? Is it in March? In March.
One thing I appreciated that one of the dockets, there's the information about what our approvals have been, the waiver approval history. That's very useful. Hopefully the board has looked at that. And I am also a little bit concerned, because if you just look at the history, it just says approved, staff priority, approved, staff priority, approved, staff priority, including recently. It doesn't actually capture this conversation. So it makes it appear anytime we're having this conversation like, why is this suddenly an issue? But this has always been, at least in the last few years, has been an issue every time we're, I think the school knows that, but it's been a constant issue for us too. So I do think we should take this on. I'm pressing the board to calendar this for actual work and some specific policy direction for our ODE on how this will be dealt with in the future. I don't want to penalize the school and under conditions where it's not clear to me that it is doing damage. It's hard to say, sorry, you're not meeting Charles's mind about, like that's not fair. So other comments about this?
I have a question.
Yeah, one more.
That's not really chartered, but it's, what are K-12, just public schools, what do they do when it comes to teachers?
Right. So I have a little bit of information on that, but that's something I know that gets brought up regularly in these conversations, and I'd be If that's something you'd like us to get more information on, I can absolutely do that. What I have heard, and I know processes exist across the state, that there are, inter-district transfers. So families, if a teacher is teaching in another district, they could pursue an inter-district transfer option. And some districts do have a process for inter-district transfers from school to school. I've heard from a number of folks, and of course this is what I've heard, I don't have the actual evidence, that there are different districts that do have a process and the option for staff to have their students attend the school where they teach. That's not universal, and there are different places where I have heard reports of that happening. However, the one thing, and I don't know if that's a local process that involves that particular student and family going before the school board and asking for that permission, or if it's granted through a procedural process at the district level. But that is kind of one of those areas where if that is truly happening, it's very different than what the expectations are for regular public schools and public charter schools.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question. So, and this, I've never asked you this, I don't think, before, but have we ever asked for, so I'm taking a very different tact. I really think that this discussion is important around thinking about equity and access to programs that meet students' needs. But another approach to this is this benefit that a public employee is gaining. That's not necessarily a financial benefit, but it's a benefit that wouldn't necessarily be available to any other citizen. And have we ever put this before the Oregon Government Ethics Commission?
We have.
Okay,
so the Oregon Government Ethics Commission did an actual, they have a letter, like I've viewed their letter for a district process that was like this. And their advice to that district was make it a part of the public employees' benefits. We then also said, well, is the same true for public charter schools? And they wrote back and said, yes, as long, I mean, it does get into the gray area a little bit for both situations, whether you're at a district or a public charter school, but they said if you include it as a part of the benefit package for that public employee, you're safer.
It's just interesting to me because
I'm remembering that my takeaway in my head, you know more than I do, but the takeaway in my head was like, it was helpful, but not conclusive in terms of when we, and it was probably 3 years ago, I think, when we asked that question. So I don't know, it might be worth looking at this again or asking some specific question if the board takes this on. But I really do hope we can take that on together as a board so we can provide some future clarity. Okay, any other discussion on this item before we act? Okay, is there a motion?
So moved. I move approval of the Cottonwood School of Civics and Science 5-year charter contract.
Moved by George, and a second?
Second.
I'll second. Oh.
I think. Okay, you got it, Kimberly. You're the second. And any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Next up is item 5C. Let's see if we can. Let's see. Let's go a little bit longer and see where we are. It's not quite lunchtime yet. Let's see if I can get through this.
All right. So before you now is the Wetumpka Community School Waiver Request. This is a newly formed school that is coming out of the North Wasco County School District, and this was formerly a program, an alternative program being operated in the district, and was going to be cut because of budget reasons. And so the staff came together and said, let's turn this into a charter school, open up the boundaries a little bit, reformulate, and continue to serve these students in the way that they do, which is through more of an year-round program that specifically serves a lot of at-risk and underserved students in the community, particularly pregnant and parenting students. And so that is what this waiver is primarily addressing, is allowing priority for the students who were enrolled in the program before to be able to continue on into the charter school and have their continued education. And then also preserving a certain number of seats in the school year over year for those students who at different times find themselves pregnant and parenting students. And so they included a lot of information from the community in terms of how many students are currently, how many students they foresee coming in future years, and the rationale for including kind of reserving those seats. Otherwise, they would be filled by other students who are not necessarily pregnant and parenting students. The district is in favor of this, and I believe that you have now seen, we do have that letter from the superintendent in here as well.
Great, thank you. Questions?
Just a couple quick. One is has this been approved by the district yet?
They're not required to approve, but we have the email stating from the superintendent that she supports the request.
In the docket.
We have, I want to say yes. There's been a lot. I think they're in the contract negotiation phase at this point. We have 6 new charter schools opening this fall, and I've been trying to track all of those, and I don't want to totally get confused, but I'm fairly confident that this school is now in the contract negotiation phase.
That's what you meant. Has the school
So
been
the-
approved?
Yes. This school, to my knowledge,
This
is
a
moving
conversion
forward.
from an alternative school to a
Charter school.
school. But and the last time they were pending approval from the school board as a district-sponsored school, and I was just wondering if that had already happened. And the second thing, and that may explain the piece, even though the superintendent says they're supportive of the waiver, and I think it was the contract or something in there that, on the waiver request, I believe.
Right.
Where it says it's from the board chair actually.
I
didn't
believe I
sign
have
it.
that. I'm so sorry. I'm sure I have that in my email. They went back and got a signature for that, for the board chair. It's not required. They were trying to go above and beyond and show very broad support. But we do have all the information for them. There's full support in the community.
I move approval of the Watonka Public Charter School waiver request.
Moved by George. Is there a second? Second by Modesta. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the waiver is approved. Thank you. Finally, the Molalla River Academy Public Charter School waiver request.
Yes, so this waiver request is similar to many other waiver requests that you've heard over the years, and they are specifically asking for enrollment priority for children of staff. And they've included information in here. We did follow up and asked for additional information. At the last board meeting, you heard from the board chair who was present, and so this is before you for a decision today.
Everything I said at the first, the first thing I would be saying to this one as well. Jerry.
Are we waiting for a motion to discuss it or discuss it now?
I asked for any questions first, so if you have
I would.
You can make a motion if you want, or you can ask a question.
I'll ask a question. At our last meeting, I looked at what is our page 199 here. It indicated that Tony Mann, the superintendent of the district, had received the request, and I asked, so what is the decision? And I thought we were gonna get that, even though it isn't, I guess, required. It's something that some of us have asked, well, where is the board on this? Where's the superintendent? And the last time, we had the same letter that said that the superintendent had received the request. Did you ask for any more information?
No.
And I have the same feelings that you do, Charles, about this area. I am looking forward to us having a discussion, and I believe that it'll be very helpful as we move forward, so.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we may want to include in that discussion is going to be this issue of, do we want to procedurally put in there, again, you know, Kate needs guidance from us, and so does that make sense to procedurally reify the, you know, correspondence with the district that suggests an opinion or makes it clear they don't have one or whatever as part of this process, but we don't have that system in place right now. Yep, Don.
Just, I love the conversation as we renew, or as school districts renew their charters. This has come up as a topic, and so then you get other staff members within our own public schools asking, well, why can't we have this? And then you get, you know, as we start driving towards equity, it presents some issues. However, I do understand, as Kate said, you know, they're not funded at the same level, so you want the passionate people in there that are doing that, but it does present some real equity issues within the entire education system.
Kate, if we calendared this, so there is a kind of a natural cycle where these things come up. If we took on some initial discussion, a first read on something, and then some kind of guidance that we would adopt, and we did that in the fall, if we could sequence that, is that going to be possible to implement by the time we might be seeing waiver requests next year?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So is that a shared? Just I'm trying to help board leadership going forward. Is that a shared consensus from the board that we should take this on, provide more clarity, make it easier for Kate and our ODE staff, but also for the schools to respond to this? George?
Yeah, so I'm really asking this of Dawn. So the letter from the superintendent, I read, and just based on the way I would have done it, that this is definitely not a letter of support, just an acknowledgement that it's happening, and that the message that isn't sent is that I don't support it. That's just the way I read it, because it doesn't say that. Is that
so
kind of an
I just want
accurate reading?
If I can, knowing some of the context and the story behind things, the school, Malal is not a very large district, and superintendents then are very busy, and so this was a very busy superintendent writing a quick letter. I wouldn't read too much into it one way or the other without calling him. And yeah, I mean, I could literally get him on the phone right now if you want.
I mean, that's an option, is we could hold this and put in a call instead of trying to guess.
The problem I have with that is simply that we don't have a precedence for doing that. So
yeah, I'm just.
But if a board member asked a question, and I apologize, we both missed that request from the last meeting, but if a board member had that request, we'd be happy to do that.
We try to reach him over lunch, too.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
so one option might be to see if that's possible before we act on this, and we could act on it after lunch, knowing that we do have to take this on, and there's consensus in the board that we would take this on in the fall, and we would establish more clarity. But if we want to delay the vote on this till after lunch, I think we could do that.
Well, it seems a little awkward
Yeah,
at this
it does.
point.
I wouldn't do
And
that. I mean, I just.
I'm not suggesting it. I'm offering that to the board.
No, but I think your lead and with us, and that is to thoroughly look at this at a later date, and this one comes in under the wire or whatever. But maybe this helps us to say, yes, we really need to clear this up. But I'd let it go at this point.
Okay.
Except that I just want, I mean, I will be voting based on assumption that the school boards, the district does not necessarily approve or concur with the recommendation. That doesn't
Yeah,
mean
we just
I
don't.
won't-
We just don't know, right?
I mean,
So,
we don't know.
Again, just the one last thing I would say is the law doesn't require this.
And that's why I mean, I may weigh it in my decision-making, but I understand that the law doesn't require it. I mean, if we had a letter in opposition, we still might take the same action.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Did I get a motion on this?
No. I don't
Okay,
think so.
I'm sorry,
No.
it's lunchtime. Okay, I'm seeking a motion.
Kimberly, you there?
Does someone want to make a motion on this?
Sure, I move that we remove this from talking about right now, this being the Molalla River Academy Public Charter School waiver request. Is that the motion we're looking for?
I think that the discussion was to not put in place a requirement given this situation. That would be unlike requirements we've asked others. So I think the motion we're looking for is a motion to approve.
Oh. I move that we approve the Molalla River Academy Public Charter School waiver request.
Okay, thanks, Kimberly. And a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Yeah, thank you. Motion passes, and I think I heard one nay. Okay, thank you very much. And we're caught up a little bit, so we are adjourned until 1 p.m.
Lunch is in the same.